Mortis Media. My fiancée at the time, now wife, worked at this naturopathic medical clinic in an old farmhouse converted to a doctor's office. The house was built in 1890 or close to that. Big place, full basement. The upstairs attic space was converted into a 2-bedroom apartment that she ended up renting from her boss. Now the place was known to all the staff to be haunted, though no one told me about it. After the fact, I heard all about seeing a little girl at the top of the old stairs all the time. The stairs were now capped in what used to be the attic prior to it being the apartment. Even without that, the place had some creepy vibes. In the basement is the original 6T wide hand dug well. Something super off about it. Even more creepy is there is a tunnel that goes from the basement to an old outbuilding about 30 m away right under the yard, and all bad down there all around. She and I each had dogs, and at this place and nowhere else they would avoid the kitchen and especially the pantry. When I say avoid, we fed them in the kitchen and they would strafe the walls, eat as fast as they could, and then leave immediately. Normally my dog is right there in the kitchen hoping to eat some people food, but not here at night. Every night between about midnight and 3 a.m. it would smell like a combination of burning garbage and rot. If you went outside, the smell would fade within about 10 feet of the structure. Electrical would fail in different parts of the place. Randomly they mysteriously return. No breakers or anything tripped or during an outage either. So my wife gets into an argument with her boss, who now expects her to be a full-time daycare provider for her toddler instead of a medical reception. They argue. She quits and the doctor says he wants her out by the end of the month. My wife says she will be gone by the end of the week. The end of the week was like 3 days, so she packed up for 2 days and I rented a U-Haul, and Friday evening she, my buddy, and I started loading the truck. I eventually sent her to my place to crash, and as she had to work her second job early in the morning, that left me and my buddy to finish moving. It was either full moon or close to. I doubt it has anything to do with this, but what happened was very strange. It was one of those nights where the moon was so bright it left shadows on everything, which is fairly rare and very cool when it happens around midnight. We took a break and sat on the floor of the now vacant living room. The door outside was on the opposite wall from us, and there were 2 skinny windows on either side of the door when something caught my eye, and I looked at the window in time to see a light move across it. I didn't say or do anything. My buddy all of a sudden says, "Did you see that?" I asked him what, and he says he saw a light go by in the right window. Outside the door is a deck with stairs going down, but directly across from the door or windows in a huge hedge. No way light came from there. So I say I saw it too and let him know it was a reflection. I tell him to not freak out. He freaks the hell out anyway. We go back to moving stuff and he doesn't stop acting triggered over it. I tell him to ignore it or it'll get worse. As I lived in a mildly haunted place for a year as a kid, and no, reacting is the wrong thing to do. He's on edge, and so far I'm as calm as a clown. My buddy freaks out and says he saw some old woman standing in the pantry as we're walking back inside. I didn't see anything. Still, he's really starting to lose it. Like at this point he's reluctant to even go back inside. We walk back down the steps and smoke a cigarette. He looks down at the ground and exclaims, "There is this little stump from a tree that someone cut down at some point, and it's literally oozing sap out of slow rivulets, the weirdest thing I've ever seen at the time. They are reflecting really well in the moonlight. We go back inside and we're almost done. I check the bedroom. All that's left in her daughter's room is a dresser and a Furby. I swear to God this Furby hasn't been used or turned on in 2 years, and sure as hell as I'm about to pick it up, its eyes flutter open and it begins making Furby nonsense noises. At this point I'm not keeping my call all that well, mostly because the entire there has been this weird feeling building up. At first it was just kind of uncomfortable, but it kept building. At this point it was kind of dread. I didn't know how to explain it. It was just getting much worse more quickly than when it started. I began picking up the Furby nearest the window and threw it out onto the lawn. Go back to packing the truck now in a big hurry, though I feel as though something terrible is coming. Almost everything is in the truck now, and it's 2:45 a.m. I'm standing in the back of the truck and he's tossing me stuff to stack. All of a sudden the thing that was coming wasn't coming anymore. It was here. He's facing the truck. I'm looking out the back and I see it. Whatever it was on the other side of the fence, but you could make it out through the gaps in the board. I jumped out of the truck yelling, "We're leaving right now." My buddy stops dumbfounded and asks why I'm already almost into the cab when I yell out, "Get in the truck, Chris." He turns around, looks behind him and sees it too. He sprints into the cab and we leave without even closing the back door. I didn't tell him what I'd seen, but what he said he saw was exactly the same as what I did. A big black shadow with like a bodybuilder body had eaten a cargo truck of steroids and was looking through the fence, and it sort of glowed in its eyes the way coals do. The next day I told the story to my wife and she let me know that everyone knew it was haunted, and she and see the lights in the window before too, which is why she said she got curtains to cover them. She said her daughter had been bothered by them the whole time she was there. She talked to me into going back for the patio furniture, though I didn't want to. We pulled up, and I swear to God you could see something pacing in the flower bed in front of the fence. Well, you couldn't see it, just the footprints it was making, and I told her no, not doing that. Get back in the truck, we'll buy you new patio stuff. We drove off. And after a few minutes I saw it too. I never set foot on the property again, and never will. I can't explain the feeling when I say dread. That doesn't cover it. The feeling that night wasn't fear of death or some horror. It was something way worse than dying, if that makes sense. Everyone can say this stupid made-up horror stuff, but this isn't it. I believed in ghosts because I had seen them as a kid and wanted. Whoever was waiting for us behind that fence was no ghost. I don't know what it was, and honestly I hope to never find out. This happened to me when I was in 3rd grade. My regular babysitter was ill, so my mom asked one of our neighbors, Brandy, who had kids and babies sat a lot of the neighbors' kids, if she could watch my brother and I for a few hours. We were having so much fun at Bry's house. When my mom came to pick us up, I asked if we could stay a little longer and finish Madagascar as we just started. She said it was fine, but I was to walk straight home after. Like maybe half a block, so not far at all. As the movie finishes, Brandy said I need to get home fast because it was dark out. As I was walking home, this other neighbor, Dennis, is standing outside in his yard. I had seen Dennis about the neighborhood because his wife was very unforgettable looking there, had a daughter, and she was about 4-ish, and I didn't ever play with her or know her family outside of seeing them around the neighborhood. Dennis starts calling to me, "Hey, what are you doing?" "I'm going home to my parents. Do you want to come inside for a bit?" No, I told my mom I'd come straight home. I'm sure she No thanks, I have a daughter who would love to play with you. We can make snacks." At this point I was like, red flag, abort mission, and Ice-T start booking at home. Then he starts to follow me, not quickly, just walking like Michael Myers. Luckily I made it home, and once he saw that I was approaching my house with my porch light lit, he backed off. I'd like to mention that behind our house was a giant wooded area with paths that led to the nearby lake, so this dude could have caught me and dragged me into the woods or something. I try not to think about what could have happened and what motives he had. Well, fast forward until I'm in high school working at a restaurant in town, and I see creepy Dennis and his wife all the time. Turns out there were secret shoppers in our restaurant, and I don't think he recognized me working. Thankfully, about 3 months ago I was on my way home from my second oldest son's house. It was late evening but still daylight. The road that I was traveling was a state route to L. The area is with a combination of cornfields and woods with quite a few hilly areas. Traffic was fairly light. At one point I come upon a fir tree blocking the roadway that was closed, so I turned around and, being familiar with the area, made my way around the closure and went on. I texted, let's just say, someone that I knew on the local sheriff's department and asked them what was going on with the road closure. Before he answered me back, I had an overwhelming feeling hit me that I should stick around in the area. There's a cemetery close to the area that I go to quite often and record videos and audio ones, so that's where I began to go to. I then get a response. It was a fatal crash, car versus truck, hidden female passenger deceased, and she was from the area. After I pull into the cemetery I get another message with 2 photos attached. I open the attachments and it was as horrible as I imagined it. One photo was of a car totally destroyed, sheets still covering the driver compartment, and there were 2 firefighters in the photo, one standing at the driver door looking down into the car, and next to him the medical examiner who was also looking down into the driver area. The second firefighter was standing on the passenger side of the door. He was staring down into the driver area. All 3 wore a somber look on their face. The look made you think that they are thinking to themselves, what a shame. Now in the background of this picture is what you'd expect to see: the fire truck, another emergency vehicle, and of course trees. Now I had been given the deceased driver's name because, due to the career that I retired from, I had dealt with her on several occasions and knew that he had too dealt with her a few times. Now as I sat there in the cemetery looking at the picture, I kept getting that overwhelming feeling that I was missing something that was in the photo, and that inner voice, if you want to call it, that kept telling me to look again, to keep looking, and that's exactly what I did. I kept looking at it. Finally something said, "Enlarge it, zoom on the 2 at the driver's door." It was almost like something was begging me, longing me to keep looking, so that's what I did, and then it was like a hammer. Every hair on my body stood on end at once, and I gasped for breath because I became physically sick to my stomach. I knew this female, but it had been a few years since I dealt with her, but there was no denying it. In the photograph of the crash, just behind the 2 emergency service workers standing at the driver's door, was the face of the deceased girl. I could not believe what I was looking at, and for me there was no denying that she was standing behind them looking down into the driver's compartment. The look on her face was complete and total shocked, like she was staring at her own body crumpled on the floorboard area, asking herself, why, what have I done, what about my daughter? I took a screenshot of the enlarged photo and showed it to the deputy. The following day I went to see him and got the full story of what happened. Apparently it took place before I showed him the screenshot, and the look on her face explained more so when I heard what led to the crown. I told him I wanted him to look at the enlarged version of the picture I sent, and when I held it up for him to see, his face instantly, without hesitation, went white. That's her, but that's not possible. She was dead when it was taken. Now I've shown the photo to a limited number of people out of privacy for her and her family, but everyone that has seen it have the same reaction. In the photograph her appearance appeared younger with her original hair color and style. Now I've had a job like this for 23 years, and I've seen a lot of death. I've had people, including children, pass away in my arms, and I've handled a lot of fatalities, but never have I had anything like this happen to me in all my years. Years ago, I used to work for one of the major chain pizza places. Around near the end of the night, we would drop down to just the shift leader and 2 delivery drivers. One driver would do the first round of dishes, we called this the late driver, and then go home about an hour or 2 before closing, depending on how busy the night was. Then we would just be the shift leader and the closing driver, and we would do all the final cleaning and whatnot. Now, no one ever wanted to do the closing shifts really, because they wanted to come in during volume periods, make their money, then leave without doing the actual cleaning work that came with working till close. Except we had this one guy that was middle-aged, single, retired, military, the minimum amount of time required, and he was a very weird individual, as I learned after working with him for a while. He also had extreme anger and aggression issues, quirks, pet peeves, and social behaviors. He was like the kid in high school that everyone picked on, but when one person tried to be nice to him, he either lashed out to make that person give up being nice, or got so weird that you regretted being nice to him. He also had a lot of very strong beliefs about how he should be treated when it came to customer interactions, and would be vindictive or passive-aggressive to people he believed had wronged him. The other people used to go extreme lengths to mess with this guy because he had such dramatic reactions. And I felt terrible about them doing it to him, but also realized that he kind of deserved it sometimes, because he was the first one to try and screw with other people, because he felt like he deserved a better tipping address than someone else, because he would work harder or whatever as the closer. Even though we check our runs by whoever was next on the screen, they would say top driver, top delivery, meaning the driver that had to be back in the store the longest got the delivery that was the oldest, so that it would stay that way and be fair. Some of his issues: number one, if an order was $19.25, he would put the 75 cents in his hand before going to the door. If they tried to tip him less than $1, say they just gave him a 20 and told him to keep the change, he would try and make them take the coin, saying no thank you. Sometimes, if he was feeling extra saucy, he would say something like, "You might need it for another order." I cannot stress how much that chains add up to at the end of the night, especially if you're giving back 99 cents because of your pride and you can't accept it without that extra penny. One customer refused to take it from him one night, and he got so angry he threw the handful of change at the guy's door. The guy called to complain because he heard him do it, and he had change all over his porch, and the guy was written up. He got so obsessed with doing this, he actually brought one of those metal belt coin dispensers that you would push the lever in and it would pop out a coin. He would buy rolls of change off this just to keep it full, and when doing that schedules, we were just scheduled 1 hour past closing time because we were expected to take deliveries up until close. That keeps us accounted for labor for the delivery driver to make a delivery at close and have time to clean up. So the guy wanted a full 40 hours a week. Since he was scheduled, it was determined to work. If he saw that we were going to be out early, he would do something to cause a problem to make us stay later. He would bring a scrub brush from home and sit there and brush on every dish for a dramatically long time to waste extra time to make it stretch so that he could be done closer to the scheduled time. If we were ready to mop up and leave 10 minutes to closing time, he would spill the mop bucket on purpose and then either try to take a whole hour to clean it up or take extra long, giving me his money to make up for the extra time by finding a discrepancy with his total, then conveniently figuring it out while it happened to hit the hour when you cut a pizza. Sometimes the pepperoni pulls into the cuts. By our guidelines, we're supposed to pull the pep out of the cuts so the pizza looks like it has the right amount of topping instead of the toppings being bunched up and crammed on the cuts. We just add the cutter to push them back. He was obsessed with using the tongs to do it instead and would have a damn mental breakdown and turn completely red-faced and start growling the longer it took. If the tongs weren't out, the other guys actually hung them from the ceiling one day about 12 feet off the ground just to watch him freak out, and he had to go get the ladder to get them. I know this just sounds like a weird guy, but no one else wanted to work with him, and he wanted the shifts no one else got, so I got to work alone with him every night 5 to 6 times a week for months. Despite me saying I felt unsafe with him, I was the one that was nice to him, so he kind of knew me as a friend, and I so regret being that person. If I mentioned liking something, he would go out of his way to bring it to me. Like one day I had nice coffee from Starbucks, and I mentioned how much I loved the cups with the flat lids, so this guy actually went online and ordered a clear plastic cup with flat lids and straws and brought them in so he could offer them to me. He tried to play it off as he just happened to have some and thought I might want one. I told him no, it's okay, I brought a cup, or I was just drinking out of a bottle, and he turned red and angry because I had turned it down after he had wasted his time and money ordering them. This was years ago when they weren't very common like they are now, which is why I was washing out the Starbu one and reusing it that day. He had done it with a few other things. One day I mentioned liking Doino's pastors and said I wish we had pastor 2 after his next delivery. He had taken way too long and I was confused where he was. He came back, had gone to Walmart, bought all this stuff to make pasta, including an electric kettle to boil pasta in foil pans, pasta, all kinds of crap. He actually got set up on the delivery table and made enough pasta for 2, but I had eaten while he was on the delivery. And he again got upset when I told him I was too full for anything. He wouldn't speak to me for the rest of the night and was slamming stuff red-faced the whole time. When a customer wanted to pay their order with a credit card but didn't say that, when the driver got there or changed their mind and wanted to pay with credit card at the door, he would have to call us and process it over the phone. He called me to do this one night and I ran the card. He then asked me if I wanted to speak to the customer and I told him no, why would I need to do that? He got very angry and said, "Gee, thanks," and hung up on me. When the pay over the phone, a credit slip isn't available. Delivery drivers are not allowed to suggest tipping in any way, and I hadn't thought about it. I was supposed to tell the customer, if you could sign the driver's delivery slip as a credit card receipt, you can add the tip and total there if you choose, but because I didn't do this, he wasn't allowed to say that and came back snarling at me how I had cost him a tip. I told him, okay, sorry, I just gave you $5 extra mileage to compensate, but he was still very angry that he could have had the possibility of making more than if I'd have just left it up to the customer. He stomped around red-faced for the rest of the night. Then, while I was sitting in the office counting down the cash draw from the register, he just let out this insanely loud roar and threw a half-empty water bottle at the office window as hard as he could, promptly scaring the ever-loving crap out of me and making me hide with the door shut for the rest of the night. I also had a night where my boyfriend had come. We were having problems at the time and had discussed going to a 24-hour place to eat after work. As we closed at about 1 a.m. on weekends, we picked IHOP. We were going to sit down and discuss important relationship crap because we were very close to separating. We just discussed going to eat. It was already understood between me and him why we never talked about that, but the driver overheard us and actually followed us to the IHOP after work and tried to sit with us like he was surprised to see us there. I got super uncomfortable and my Boyfriend gave him a very serious look and said, "I'm sorry, we're discussing some pretty important personal things, so tonight isn't the best night." He turned red and said okay and sat at the booth directly behind us and turned his music up as loud as he could. He used to wear these huge wireless headphones all the time, and we could hear his headphones blaring his music even though was wearing them. When we went to leave, I tried to apologize to him that we weren't up for guests with us that night, but he closed his eyes, bobbed his head, and ignored me till I left, and he didn't speak to me at work for about a week. I had tons of nights where he would get no tip on some order and have these supercharged rages, and stuff would just snowball until I was hiding from him wherever I could. I was afraid to clean the store too early because he would come back to the store about 15 minutes close and see I had gotten everything cleaned up while he was gone, and would turn beet red and just lean against the wall fuming like a bomb. And I had to be alone with this guy every day for months. It got to the point on weekends that I was so scared of being alone with him. If it was slightly busy, I would need to keep the other driver a little later and pay him extra money out of my pocket just to feel safe. He was my hero that got me through some of the nights working with this guy. Another night I was there with another manager, and we were in the office looking at the numbers in the system. The other manager was also a guy. The driver had his phone hooked up to a speaker playing music through the store. The guy with me just freezes, his eyes slide out of focus, and his mouth just drops, and he's staring at the empty space in front, almost drooling on himself because whatever happened had him shocked and amused. He slowly turns to look at me and starts to laugh out this low, dirty old man laugh. I'm completely lost as to what's going on and ask him what then. He says, "You don't hear that?" I was so focused on his reaction that I wasn't paying attention to what was playing then. I recognize it. I look up out the office door and see the driver making a bina, all red face to his phone, catches me looking at him and just gives me this smirk. His phone was playing over porn over the entire store very loudly, and somehow I didn't notice it. The guy also used to sit in the office when we were slow and would tell me about his sexual prowess because he practices Keel, and how when he was overseas in the military he had a girlfriend that didn't speak English, and he later learned she was a hooker. He overshared way too much information. It was terrible. He bragged about the Kegel thing like he was trying to interest me, and I never wanted to escape as badly then as I did even after all the insane rages. Once I quit that store, he got paired with a male manager. The complaints were taken seriously, and they finally fired him because he backed into a post in the parking lot of a strip club. The club didn't complain, but the stripper Cinnamon was notorious for not tipping. Irony, the girl would have her customers order her a pizza as a tip and have them pay for it when it arrived. Since the pizza itself was a tip to her, they wouldn't tip the driver usually. This was the lowest class place you can imagine. While one of the customers had to call the store to pay with their credit card one day, when he didn't tip the driver, the customer was still on the phone with the manager in the parking lot, and the driver was raging so hard he slammed it into reverse and backed into a post and took off. The customer told the manager that they needed to do something about this guy and that he was going to severely hurt someone, and that he technically had just fled the scene of an accident even if he had only damaged his own car, and the post was fine. They fired him when he got back. All the time I was alone with this guy and all the weird stuff he'd done in the time I worked there. I hope no one ever has to suffer that again. I know I could have just quit, but I enjoyed the job. The pay was decent for my position, and I wasn't the one in the wrong, so I was being stubborn and want to see him removed before I could just give up, and was happy doing so. But in the end I gave up and quit. No job is worth crying in the office for and calling everyone you know to see if they can come hang out with you just so that you can feel safe. My roommate somehow procured a somewhat large amount of weed for an obscenely low price. The buds were all right, but nothing super special, so she decides that instead of smoking it she's going to make ridiculous amounts of THC infused cookies. I watched as she made some very strong Ghana butter. I ate one of her cookies and had an awesome trip full of the things you wish marijuana still did to you. A few days later, I was home watching a movie with a girl, and my 3 roommates come home with 2 other people, one of the people I know and one of the others I'd never seen in my life. I take the girl home after the movie ends and come back home. I'm offered a cookie and down it as quickly as I could muster. Apparently my roommates all had one, and the 2 visitors split one. 20 minutes later, the guy I don't know called Brian starts showing symptoms of being a little too high. This isn't seen as a problem because it's usually not a problem, and the person just goes to sleep. Well, this isn't enough for Brian and he begins to freak out. We offer him water and a room in which he can just lie down. He takes up the offer and disappears into the back of the house. We continue watching 30 Rock or whatever ever, and a little later we notice voices coming from the back. Brian's friend Kelsey investigates the matter and discovers that he has been on the phone with police. He apparently told the dispatcher that he had been poisoned and is trapped at our house. At this point, he runs into our living room in his boxes and storms outside. We stare at each other and chase him down. We can't be having a crazy pantry 20-year-old something parading himself outside our house at 7:30 at night. While he is gone, my roommate picks up the phone and tries to clear things up. By this point, all the dispatcher wants is an address so that she can send a police car. We hide some of our other evidence not involved in the situation in my room, but intentionally leave the cookies on the table. The cops show up and look like they have an itchy, arresting arm just ready to take someone down to the station, but before they can get more than 2 words out, Brian Karen around the corner and almost runs into them. He is shocked at first, but then does something that requires me to change to a new paragraph. He actually tapped the officer's belt, pretending to have stolen his gun, and then points the fake gun at the officers and pretends to shoot. By this point, we're all baked as hell and screaming inside our own heads, "Don't shoot him in our house, oh my god, he's going to get shot in our house." But to the officers' credit, they don't even freak out or react to this because he was so visibly messed up in there, the head right now. Brian then tries to run away. They tackle him and then throw him to the couch. They ask us what he has taken and we respond truthfully, half a marijuana cookie. They ask if we had taken a cookie as well, and we admit that we had. They asked us who made them, and we hesitantly told them that we had. I was fully expecting to get searched and dragged off to prison. I had succumbed to the fact that everything I did from this point on was an attempt to just not make things worse, but Brian had a different idea. He was so messed up that he began yelling things about Jesus and was kicking the officers. We had to reassure them many times that all we had was half a cookie. It got so bad that they had to call for backup. It got even worse, so they had to call an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, they bumped our count of uniformed personnel in the house to 12. After a few minutes of the police explaining what was going on, one of the paramedics pulls out a needle and sticks it into Brian's naked leg and reassures him it will make him feel good and go to sleep. The effects obviously are not instant because 30 seconds later Brian is screaming his head off again. They strapped him to a gurney and wheeled him out. Now at no time during this did the cops ask for a name, number, ID, or anything from us. They didn't search the house or do anything. Well, as the medics left, the cops did too, offering one piece of advice: no more cookies for this guy. This is a true and real experience that happened when I was delivering newspapers early one winter morning. It was around 4 a.m. and freezing. I was out on my usual paper route delivering newspapers. The whole neighborhood was still shrouded in complete darkness. The bitter winter winds were blowing strong. I was approaching an apartment block with my papers, and as I was heading to a dark corner of the building, I heard a voice. It sounded like people were talking. What the hell were people doing at this old hour out in the cold? I wondered as I squinted my eyes in order to get a better look. As I drew closer, I saw there was a woman doubled over and Crouching in the hallway before me, instantly I knew something was wrong. As I got closer, I noticed that all the woman was wearing was her underwear. Why was out here in the freezing midwinter morning alone with no clothes on? She was shivering. I went over to her and asked her what had happened, if she was okay, and if she needed any help, but she wouldn't reply to me. I couldn't stand to see her like that. Before long, she would freeze. Her lips were already going blue. I took off my coat and tried to put it around the woman, and she pleaded with me not to give her the coat and tried to push it off. She muttered something about if her husband saw her with the coat, she'd be in trouble. At that moment, I knew I had to do something. I suspected domestic violence, so I called the police, and while I waited for the CS to arrive, I waited by the woman by her front door. She still wouldn't say a word. I don't know how long she had been out there. It was truly sad and a haunting sight to see that woman alone in her underwear on a dark, cold winter morning. While we were waiting for the police, her front door burst open, her husband rushing out. He started shouting at her. She cowered as he threw a punch at her. I, obviously in terror, and thankfully I was strong enough to protect the woman. Until police arrived, the woman broke down and told police that this wasn't the first time he had forced her out into the cold in just her underwear, so it seemed like this kind of thing was happening all the time, which made me sick to my stomach. I've always tried to see the best in people, but this incident rocked my confidence in human beings. I mean, to throw your half-naked wife out into the cold. Humans are terrifying. I used to live in a haunted house. It was a few hundred years old and in a village that was much older. The oldest house there was built in the 1400s. I was around 5 or 6 and we moved out when I was 11. In the first year I was in an extension of the house. My bedroom was over next door's kitchen, if that makes sense, and my bedroom door was fine on the hinges but kept being pushed over open. It couldn't physically open without the handle being pushed down, so there was no explanation as to how this happened. I switched rooms, so me and my sister were in the room over our house. Mirrors would flip out of desks and other things would fall over randomly with no explanation as to how. Footsteps would be heard from upstairs, and there was always a weird atmosphere too, like you knew something was there. If my whole family didn't experience the same thing, then I wouldn't have believed it. We always heard the name Walter being said in primary school. One of my friend's granddads used to live in our village. Growing up, he asked which house we lived in, and when he said, oh, that was Walter's house. That kind of said in stone frost that something was seriously up, although it never hurt us. I think it was just having fun. My younger sister made claims of a woman who played with her teddies when she was around 2, and my mom saw a young boy sitting on our steps, and she definitely wouldn't make that up. The atmosphere was pretty good when a house is haunted, and I go and I can feel it now, if that makes sense. Between the ages of 4 and 12 I was friends with a boy called Jack. Jack was always a bit of a strange kid, but being my neighbor, he was my first friend in life. Me and Jack used to play out every day, whether it was football, going to the park, or even tag in the street with the other kids. You name it, we did it. One weekend it was summer, and when we were 8 years of age, it was a scorching hot day, and 2 of the kids in our street were having a water fight, having some water guns in our shed. I thought it would be a great idea to fill one up and join in. So as the day goes on and we're having a great time, and a few other kids had joined in with their water guns, this is when Jack comes out with one of those insulated flasks that keeps your water/drinks warm all day, and he HS his flask. Presumably he in to throw the water, but it was full to the brim and it proved too heavy for him to keep hold of, and the water and flask fell to the pavement, steam instantly rising just a few feet from me and the other one of the kids. Jack's mom came rushing out of her house and screaming at him to get inside. Being only 8, I didn't realize how serious this was. A few years later, Jack and me went to our local park, and when we got there, Jack asked me if I wanted to see something cool. He then pulled out a BB gun, a good one at that, and said he got it off his dad, who said he could shoot cans with it. But when me and Jack went into the forest behind the park. Jack started firing at random kids. Also playing in there. I told him to stop a few times, but he told me to stop being boring and continued with this stupid behavior. I then made my way home, where Jack would follow, shooting at me every so often, hitting me in the shins a few times. I told Jack to grow up and told him I didn't want to hang around with him and him in school or after school. I continued to see Jack in school, who would smile creepily at me and would make slices across the throat with his fingers when he saw me. And one day I was in my garden with my cousin, and Jack was in his bedroom window with a tie and made a noose gesture with it and pointed at me and my cousin before smiling sinisterly. Jack became very odd, and with our houses being attached and us unfortunately having the same back bedrooms, I would hear him hysterically laughing at night and would hear bangs on the walls at stupid hours. Shortly after I turned 11, Jack and his family moved away and life was peaceful. I continued to grow up and live out to my mid to late teens with great friends, and Jack became a distant memory as I lived out my teens and moved away to university. I'm 22 now, and when I visited home this past summer, my parents informed me that Jack had been admitted to a mental institution after he had attempted to kill his parents and had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This shocked me, as I didn't quite know what to say, but these events did come flashing back to me. My dad actually told me that the water fight incident was serious. Jack had attempted to throw boiling hot water at me and my friend that day, and we would have been seriously scolded had he succeeded. So Jack, I hope you get all the help you need in that mental institution, and hope we don't meet again in my city at a travel lodge on the main commercial street. A few people who met on some dating site or Craigslist or something ended up ritualistically killing themselves inside one of the rooms. According to the police report, the two people who found it weren't the actual cops, but rather the next door occupants. They heard a commotion and looked out their door, only to find blood coming through the door like it was The Shining. They walked in to investigate and found the mangled bodies of the two women who found each other and the barely living body of the guy who found them both. As he told it, they were supposed to let him kill them for the glory of Satan and something like that, and then he would kill himself. The crime scene was so gruesome and traumatic that several police officers and paramedics and nurses who treated the guy were all later treated for post-traumatic stress, and the incident had led for the movement calling to have PTSD therapy for first responders. I also wish to share that an Air Force major who was in charge of the local cadets corps was found with a massive multi-terabyte storage. Think about that, multi-terabyte storage of indecent images of children, you know, the kind. This is a short story from someone else's perspective. I was in cadets for a few years a while back in the Army, and the commanding officer of our Air Sister Corps was caught with the CP. The guy was a major and he was in charge of around 100 kids on a weekly basis. I was told he later hung himself in order to escape prosecution. Funny story, I was on a school trip and our bus driver wore a bomber jacket with Royal Canadian Air coral crested on it. I sparked a conversation with him and it turned out it was Major Pedo, direct successor. One thing led to another and we got into the conversation about how the major pedophile and how everyone reacted, believe it or not, but as it turns out, taking over the Air Cadets call from someone like that isn't as hard as you would expect, apparently. So the cop who found it was coincidentally the mother of one of the Air Cadets in the Corps. Called it the most disgusting thing she'd seen in all her years of service. No wonder that Major decided to call it quits. Safe to say it, but my town of around 200,000 people is quite the little screw up. Mind you, I haven't even mentioned being the meth and crack herring per capita of Ontario. That's a whole mother story. My family has owned our property since around the time my mom was little. So that's around 42 years now. Growing up, there was this house on our property that was locked up time and basically falling apart inside that we unfortunately didn't have the money to demolish yet. Inside there wasn't really anything of value. There was a massive wasp nest that I swear was the size of a dumpster and rats' nests everywhere. That locked up house had been on the property before my family purchased it, and a long while after. When we finally got the money to demolish it, I was around 10 or 11. My grandfather went inside a few times to clean it out a bit to see if there were any valuables in the nests or stowed somewhere else he hadn't bothered to check before. During one of his searches, he found an old locket. It was sort of old and had a unicorn and rubor on the front, and he found a digital clock inside that was busted. Little kid me loved it and asked to have it, so he let me keep it for the next few days that they took the house to be demolished. I had awful luck. My favorite action figure broke. My favorite chess game lost all its data until one night after the house was finally demolished. I had a vivid nightmare that some awful shadow woman monster appeared from where the house had once been, grabbed the locket off my neck and went out to the bedroom window and took off in a swish of smoke. In the morning, I couldn't find the locket at all, and needless to say, I was extremely freaked out. I remembered it and looked for it for about a week and a year, eventually deciding it was lost. That is, until 23 years later, after I found it upstairs in the attic where I knew I'd never been because I wasn't allowed to play there due to the splinters and it being very hot. I swear my heart stopped and I got this eerie feeling from looking at it, but I also felt this tugging inside that wouldn't let me just leave it there, so I took it. My luck sucked for a solid week after I found it, but I'm still incapable of getting rid of it. I just hid it in a drawer and don't touch it, and I'm wondering if this pendant is cursed or something. I worked at Domino's and we had to blacklist a guy because he was obsessed with me. He would come in and ask if I was there. If I wasn't working that day, he would just show up the next. If I was on a delivery, he'd wait around in the store for me. He wouldn't tell me that he loved me and asked me out on dates. He was very bad on heroin and made it obvious, but last time I delivered to his house, he ordered about $40 worth of food and drink and kept trying to hand me $100 even though I told him numerous times I didn't have the change. He apparently stole his grandma's cell phone and wouldn't give it back, and him and his cousins were screaming at each other the whole time I'm waiting to get the smaller bills. He keeps telling me he had nothing smaller than 100 and kept arguing with me because he changed his mind and just wanted one pizza on a drink, and I told him he couldn't do that. Safe to say, I really hope I never encounter this person in any other way again in my life. Mom and I had a really long day of running errands and we were heading home for the evening. We discussed stopping at our local convenience store for gas and drink, but the closer we got to the convenience store, we both agreed that maybe it was just best we go home and crash, so we did that. I even remember my mom saying exactly, we can just get the gas in the morning. Well, little did either of us know that was probably the best decision we ever made. The next morning we got up and sat in the living room to watch TV. The news opens with a story of how 3 teens robbed, shot, and killed a convenience stock clerk and severely wounding a customer. The convenience store, the very same one Mom and I had been planning to stop at on our way home 5 to 10 minutes before the robbery and shooting happened. Mom and I were shaken beyond belief. I have absolutely no doubt that had we stopped there, neither of us would have lived to tell the tale. I lost my mom in January of 2019, but I'm grateful every day that it wasn't 21 years earlier. My parents bought a house built in 1848, Ontario, Canada. I was retrofitting a cabinet built into the wall to accommodate a safe and accidentally uncovered a sealed-up Hallway in room 2 years earlier my parents had tried to insulate the exterior walls by blowing in fiberglass insulation from the outside. They couldn't figure out why they kept running out of insulation. Well, the hallway had about 3 feet of insulation on it, and it had also spilled into the spare room. Sitting neatly on top of the blown-in insulation was a saucer and a teacup set, as though tea may be in it. It was totally empty. Though no insulation ever got in, we took pictures and discovered tons of orbs and some plasma looking images that looked almost like a winged creature. Seriously strange. My neighbors in the crappy apartment I moved to after I moved out of my parents' place were hoarders to the extreme and alcoholics. We started getting roaches in our apartment about 2 months after they moved in. Then came the mice, then the rats about a month after we moved, and we called 911 on them because we found one of them passed out in the parking lot or on the doorstep or the stairs. They came over and asked who kept dialing 911, and then they cured us out because they didn't have insurance and had to take out numerous payday loans to cover the ambulance costs. We broke our lease and moved out after someone took a dump on our welcome mat. Talk about friendly neighbors. I used to see a girl whose dad was a police officer. He told her pretty much the most horrific gangland murder I could ever imagine. They found the body of a local criminal at the bottom of a lake, complete with concrete boots to make sure he sunk. The thing is, whoever did this to him thought it wasn't enough to do that, so they attached an oxygen tank and breathing apparatus so he'd be alive for at least an hour before eventually drowning. I used to have one of those sort of bunk beds that had a desk underneath now, and then I'd be laying in the bed and hear this breathing behind me. I'd jump right the hell out of bed and run to my parents' room and sleep on the floor. My mom told me to not be silly and that ghosts don't breathe, which is a fair point. So another time I came out of my room and noticed that the loft hatch was open and some silhouette of a person was looking down from the loft. I thought it was one of my parents and thought nothing of it. I went downstairs and my dad was on the couch and my mom in the kitchen. That's when I get a weird feeling and walked back up the stairs to look up, and the loft hatch was now closed. I went out and took a long walk that day, thinking I must have been imagining things. It just feels so strange. I was out of town on business, so I treated myself and ordered in. From my favorite restaurant, delivery guy arrived and insisted he had to come into my place to deliver the food to take payment. I had to loudly refuse this multiple times in the hope the neighbor would hear me, and kept insisting. Finally, I got him to process my payment in the hallway, but he was muttering under his breath the whole time. Scared the hell out of me. I double-locked the door when he left and sat up all night feeling uneasy. I wish I'd reported him to the restaurant, but I was too shaken to think about it. When my brother and I were younger, our parents took us on an unforgettable trip to a theme park. The theme park has since closed down, and I think incidents like the one I'm about to describe are most likely responsible for its shutdown. I was around 8 or 9, and my brother was around 4 or 5 when this happened. It was summer vacation, and our parents promised us that if we were good during the summer break, then before we would go back to school, they would take us to an amusement park. After many boring days and nights of good behavior, our promise was delivered. We all bundled into the car and headed for the amusement park. It wasn't Disney World or Fuji-Q Highlands. It was a bit on the cheaper side and a bit more old school. I think the park was established in the 60s, so it was the kind of park that still had haunting clown murals everywhere and the creepy robotic animatronics. Those two titans of terror would be enough these days to put me off wanting to go, but back in the 80s, these creepy clowns and glitchy animatronics were socially acceptable. I guess we had come all the way anyway. We finally get to the park a little later than my parents had hoped. There was the usual bickering on the car ride that had been intensified due to a flat tire and bad directions. I guess we got there around 700 and the park was set to close at 99. We would have all of the next day to go to the park, but we were so eager to see something before we went to bed. We were staying in the park hotel, so we dumped our bags in the room and then headed down to the park as a family. When we were in there, it was the usual kind of thing: Ferris wheels, roller coasters, bumper cars. Our parents pitched up a picnic table and got themselves a few drinks to let us roam the small park together. We went on this Ferris wheel, and that was great. If not a little creaky, it gave us an aerial view of the park. There was a clown show kind of area, and one of the clowns was waving to us. We waved back, of course. Then the clown started making his way over to the Ferris wheel. As we descended, he greeted us as we got to the bottom. It was great. We felt so special. He had a big old red diamond painted over his eyes, a blue nose, and mad yellow hair. His white clown face paint glowed, and as the sun was beginning to set, he asked, "Hi kids, are you enjoying the park?" "Yeah, we are," we replied. He made some small talk with us and then asked us to play the honesty game, and that if we answered all the questions honestly, we would get a prize. "What's your favorite color? Are your parents here? Do you like soccer?" "Kids, are you staying at the park hotel?" "What's your favorite ride? What room number are you staying in? Do you like maths or science?" The least, since we were young, we answered all his questions honestly, and he was true to his word. He said he would come and deliver a special ticket to our hotel room later, and that the ticket would allow us to go on a special ride with him, but if we told anyone about the ticket, we wouldn't be allowed on. We could barely contain our excitement. We agreed and said he would go let our parents know. Looking back on that now, we missed several red flags. I mean, remembering this is quite traumatic. After an hour or so, the park put up a message over the speaker system saying it would be closing shortly. Our parents rounded us up and we had our dinner and went back to the room. We whispered to each other about our special ticket coming later. Giddy with excitement, our parents said they were heading downstairs to the hotel bar, and they put a movie on for us and told us to stay in bed, keep the door locked. We couldn't focus on the movie. We sat on our bed staring at the door, waiting for the clown to come and collect us for our special ride. After about 20 minutes of our parents leaving, we heard a knock at the door. I pushed a chair up to the door to look at the people to see who it was. I saw a man out there. I was so disappointed that it wasn't the clown. I quietly climbed back down from the chair and told my brother. The man outside knocked the door again, but we ignored it. Then he spoke. "See, don't you want to ride the super secret ride?" It was the clown's voice, but when I looked out the peephole a few minutes ago, it was just a man. I thought something wasn't right. "Hurry, kids, you'll miss your chance." My brother began to put his shoes on, and I five his arm. This was wrong. I didn't like this. I called back. No, it was all I had. I just instinctively knew that the door should remain shut. He wasn't the clown anymore. "Open the door," he said, dropping his clown voice. My brother began to whimper. I said nothing. "Open the door now, or you'll be in so much trouble." My brother pulled on my sleeve and ushered me towards the bathroom. I then heard the man fiddling with the lock, knocking and muttering. His voice was getting angrier. We locked ourselves in the bathroom. He hammered on the door. He was shouting, and then the room fell silent. About 10 minutes passed, and we heard the door open. Silent. Tears were rolling down my brother's face and mine as I held his hands over his mouth to muffle his screams. "Where are they?" I heard my mom call, and relief washed over us. We told our parents about what happened, and they thought we had just watched a scary film or had a bad dream. We couldn't convince them of the fact that we just had a near miss. Years later, the park was shut down. I hope to God nothing bad happened to anyone else, and it just went out of business sometime back in the early 90s. My then girlfriend and I lived in a Victorian terraced house. Nothing overtly spooky ever occurred there apart from the neighbors complaining that someone had been in their house and moved things around while they were away. They were alarmed enough to call the police, and seeing as there was a shared roof space along the terrace, we were briefly questioned, as were the other neighbors. Weirdly, the police asked if there had been any paranormal activity in either of our houses, which we obviously laughed off at the time. A few months later, my girlfriend and I were laying in bed with the lights out. I was on my back with my eyes open when slowly illuminescent hollow ball faded into view, seemingly made up of lots of very small dim fluorescent rods like the magnified pictures of bacteria. You see, the ball was about a meter across and perhaps a meter and a half above the middle of the bed. It was obvious I was having some kind of pre-sleep hallucination. A few seconds later it faded, and I turned to my girlfriend and said I just saw a small ball of light floating over the bed. She had seen it too. We lay there shocked. Soon after, another hollow ball appeared, this time made up of dim fluorescent triangles. It lasted a few seconds and faded away. I think after that our eyes were tightly shut and heads went under the duvet, but the experience was never repeated as far as any of us saw. I told this story to somebody once, and they wonder what would have happened if we'd have reached up to this strange object. I consider most of 1996 to be a rebuilding year in my life. I was 25 years old, fresh out of a relationship that crashed and burned right before the wedding. So deep was the crater and widespread fallout that I had to move to a different state to avoid my to-be father-in-law's friends in law enforcement, who were making sure I spent time roadside with them at least 4 times in the first 2 months after it all ended. I started over in a new place with a lack of resources and connections that were going to make it hard for me to get back into shape before I turned 30. Still, I was free and beholden to but my creditors, so I had that going for me. I lived in my means and rented a townhouse in a long row of properties in a less than reputable part of town. I didn't have time to do a walkthrough before I moved in. In fact, I rented the place unseen based on the online ad alone. It was close to the job, which was great because someone trashed my car the week before I moved out, and I ended up driving a beat-up Dodge pickup that I bought with the last of my savings. Once settled, I was locked into the rental for 12 months, which oddly enough gave me a sense of permanence in my new surroundings and helped me get to work on my new life and career in human capital management and training services. My unit was at the end of a block of 12 with 2 bedrooms up top with a master bath and half bath in the living area. It was not a massive space, but it felt empty for lack of any furniture. I slept on an inflatable mattress my first 3 months and used folding chairs and a card table to eat, watch television. The block was a place where people were either on their way up or back down, young kids in their first home, recently divorced with kids, the downturn from society in one way or another. There were fights, domestic and otherwise, throughout the night. Drunken parties and birthday gallers took over the block on weekends, but nobody ever interacted with other families. For some reason, no one knew anyone else's name or business. At least that's what the cops told me the first time they stopped by to ask me if I'd heard or witnessed something going on the block. My immediate neighbors were just weird, like a space monkey on your lawn inviting you to an anal probe, kind of weird. It was a circus of 3. The short, wild-haired woman looking like an off-brand troll doll with big pink hair that defined logic and a malfunctioning soundtrack that only shrieked when provoked. The tall, thin man looked like an average bald human might appear in an elongated funhouse mirror. I never knew how old they were, but they resembled old, well-worn furniture, like the contents of any elderly couple's storage locker, old and ready to be discarded. Troll doll lady and funhouse man were not fond of talking to neighbors or anyone. They were troubled people. Their fights would bleed through the shared walls and get louder when talking outside. They knocked my only hanging AR from the wall when one threw the other against the other side. Funhouse man liked to take his morning coffee in the sunshine, standing behind the screen of his front door in tidy whities and an oversized flannel shirt. He was often the first person I'd encounter in the morning on my way to work, and he would stare off across the playground into the woods as if in a trance long before I left the townhouse, and probably long after my truck took me away. The cops knew them by their real names. There had been a child living there, but he or she had been removed from the home. A frequent guest in their little David Lynch sitcom was a guy called Chuck, so named because Troll Lady would yell his name every 10 minutes anytime he was in the house. Chuck was a lawn haul trucker who parked his sleeper rig across the street every few weeks. For some reason, he didn't shower inside, so Saturday morning he would often run the garden hose over the fenced-in area in the back to take a cold shower, which was a lovely sight. For the first time, when I didn't know what was going on, he sometimes walked out back to take a long beer piss in the runoff drain. His aversion to indoor plumbing was never explained to me, but I'm forever grateful I never walked back out to catch him pooping a squat in the tree line. For about 6 months I tolerated the noise, let the neighbors be the bad guys, and call the police when the fights went on too loud for too long, or when they got all drunk and played their 80s punk records through the night and engaged in songs of their people howling at the moon. I got to a point where I was making enough money to buy real furniture and rent a better place, but I still had a Leah on her, so I bought a sofa, a real bed, and a desk set for an office. It was still a minimalist affair, but comfortable. The townhouse felt like my home for once, and suddenly the intrusions from the neighbors were twice as annoying. One night, Troll Doll Lady got into a fight with a pizza delivery driver who knocked on her door by mistake but wouldn't give her the pizza. I only know this because the pizza and its box hit my front window at different spots. This shrieking pinkhead which assaulted the driver, which led to a light show by the police. I was left to clean the pizza off the window and called the office to replace the window. They refused until the neighbors agreed to pay, so I enjoyed a cracked window for a month before the court accepted her guilty plea over property damage. Her arrest was around the same time that residents on our block and the next one over began reporting burglaries, and I was asked by police if I had any information or experienced anything odd other than the 3 Geek Circus next door. I told them I did not. Fortunately, my work and social life were on the rebound. I met a girl and we hit it off, though we stayed far from my house during the early part of our relationship, so I began spending more time away from home, though I would often come home late to the neighbors in a loud state of either bliss or rage. During the day, maintenance works to replace the insulation and update the HVAC system along the attic spaces along the entire block. I didn't think much about it because the work was done while I was gone in the daytime, and assumed the property managers would be coming into my place at some point to access my attic, probably the last one, as they started on the far end from mine. Quickly I lost track of the project, but one night I came home and something felt a little off. The front door was locked, the windows intact, and the back door secured. However, it felt and even smelled a little off. Sometimes I could smell the tobacco and weed upstairs when it filtered up and over the attic space, but I was sure someone had been there. I cleared the house in a short, quiet march as my dad, a Marine, taught me, but found no one and nothing missing. My computers, 2 TVs, everything was intact, except I went to grab a beer from the fridge to calm my nerves and found it 6-pack missing. I was sure I had 2 scratch batch stout packs from my last visit to Stewie's Microbrew. The loaf of bread seemed to be a little shorter than the morning before by several slices. I couldn't be sure, but I thought I might be missing some other items as well, but wasn't sure if that was just the growing anxiety over being robbed. I wondered if maintenance had been by to inspect the window or work in the attic and help themselves to snacks and drinks. It would explain the musty smell in my apartment, and given the people I knew who owned it and managed the property, it would not surprise me if a couple of their day laborers took a load off for a bit. The smell was most unpleasant upstairs, but in my office, which was opposite the neighbor's all, so it wasn't lingering dank, it was clearly Juai funk. I immediately assumed labor because it made the most sense, so I didn't report it to the police that night. The next morning, however, I discovered my medications missing from my cabinet. All of them, my Lexapro, my emergency anxiety medication, and my other bottles were gone. I checked the windows and doors again, now in a near panic, and called off work for the first time using a burglary as my excuse. That was the 7th house in my 2 townhouse blocks to be hit in the past 2 weeks, the 5th in my block, and one of the 5 without signs of forced entry. The police wouldn't tell me much about the other incidents and didn't seem to believe that I locked my doors until I reminded them who I lived next to. By that point, I really didn't want to live in that place anymore. It no longer felt like home. I was sharing it with something, and I felt like it lingered in the air around me. There was a feeling of dread, a sense of violation, knowing there was someone out there who was inside your life without permission. Once removed, it feels like living in a home without walls. And there was a serial burglar in a neighborhood where the cops traditionally let it work out its own problems and carry away the remains. A week after the break-in, a few things happened to mess up my world further. First, troll doll lady returned home, and because she was on house arrest, a welcome party brought out all the freaks on Friday night. Second, because I was a dumbass, I had to come home and pick up a few things I needed to spend the weekend with my new girlfriend, as she was already in the truck and we were going to the highway and out of town. There was no other choice but to bring her home with me. The lot, including my spaces, were filled with what looked like gridlock in a demolition derby, so I had to park a good distance away. Third, she insisted on seeing the inside of my townhouse and taking a pee before hitting the road, so I had to introduce her to the freak show next door before even setting foot inside. On the way up the walk to the front door, we encountered the funhouse man in the open doorway, gatekeeper to the drunk Damassary. Inside, he was wearing his morning apparel, reefs, and a long shirt, except with a can of Red Dog instead of coffee in his hand. Funhouse man looked at us coming up the walk and spoke to me for the first time in 7 months. "You tapped Dad," I think he said, his wet mouth spitting the words and his dead eyes scoping my girl. I shifted to put myself between them on the walk as we closed in on the door and fished my keys out of my pants. Funhouse man panicked, letting out a squeal before diving inside and slamming the door. The party was silent instantly. My girl was unnerved by all of this and lost all of the thrill of being with me in that place, and I registered her immediate disapproval. She didn't even want to pee there. I remember making some excuse, saying it's a temporary thing and the first step to living better, but it was the beginning of the end for us. Like she caught me cheating with trolled old lady. I didn't realize the party had spilled out into the front lawn and in front of my townhouse until I opened the door to see Chuck the trucker standing under my porch lamp, looking drunk, stupid, and angry. He was joined by a few strangers who looked equal parts in the same condition, and also like I had just fired the lot of them from the sideshow. I stopped inside the screen door trying to think of anything to say, clever or otherwise. Chuck the trucker started the conversation. "You go at Kenny. What I asked you if you went after Kenny in his own home." Nothing like that happened, but I knew immediately that my reality was not shared by those gathered in front of my own home. "No." He said something I got close to hear. He squealed and then ran inside. End of story. I was okay at the end of the first 2 sentences, but my anger got the best of me by the start of the third, and it did little to calm the group, which had swollen to about a dozen people looking for blood or things to break. Chuck was not convinced by my answer and took a few steps forward to open my screen door. he put a hand on the knob and stopped. "You step out here, or I come in there. Go take a crap in a tree. You're not coming in here, and I'm not bleeding over that weirdo friend of yours. You can go beat each other up like you normally do." The words "so there" because Chuck had punched a hole in my screen to get to my face. I fell back and accidentally tackled my now firmly ex-girlfriend. Fortunately, I didn't have much in the way of furniture to break on the way down. The only thing going for me at that moment was the miraculous arrival of the police, drawn by the parking fiasco and the noise. My face was broken. My newest ex had a bloody nose and sprained shoulder, and I was out a good $400 in deposit for a weekend that would never happen. In short order, a few important things occurred. Chuck went to jail, and the charges against him would become the least of his problems. The party turned into a story time where partygoers spun their best yarn about how I insulted, assaulted, beat, or did sexual things to Kenny against his will, i.e. the funhouse man. I was questioned about the encounter by police and spent time with an EMT who I totally failed to impress enough to get her number. I was let go as several of the partygoers were arrested for either public drunkenness, disorderly conduct, or outstanding warrants. I'm sure this warmed me to the neighbors and their friends. My weekend companion was rescued from it all by a friend who drove her out of my life forever. You would think 8 things in short order would be enough. I had to continue living next to these screw-ups for at least a few more months, and I was going to spend those months terrified by what they might do to my property while I was working, or if the burglars came back. However, I woke up the next morning to see the neighbors cleaning up the party glass and aluminum, plastic, and cardboard boxes, 2 full-sized bins. Credit where it's due, they recycled from my what the hell position in my bedroom window. I noticed 2 of the bottles stood out from the Keystone Red Dog and Milwaukee labels. They were the scratch batch labels from my 6-pack. Now there was a chance that they were bought to the party by a guest with better taste in beer than their friends, but that was a very big coincidence. My brain presented a question that I could not answer. Where is the attic access in the townhouse? I just assumed there was one somewhere, but never actually looked or came across it. How did maintenance get into it? While totally unrelated to the beer bottle, on conscious level, my paranoia and cynical nature collaborated on a series of connections. As I looked around the house for a drop that I had missed for months, my brain worked in its weird way to line up facts in such a way that would sound insane if I wrote it all out. I went upstairs. My office was where the funk smell had been most poignant. I looked up and around and decided to check the closet. I didn't check it before because there was nothing in it. On the carpet, I noticed a light dusting of drywall and paint flecks. I assumed it was from rubbing on the sliding door against the wall, but it concentrated at the side by the wall and not equally along the track. The closet only had hanging shelves on the interior side. Looking up, I expected to see an attic access port, but found a jagged square carved into the drywall ceiling. Maintenance was not exactly flip this shack quality, but I didn't think even they would have used a box cutter to carve a hole in my ceiling, and none of them was skinny enough to fit through. That funhouse man was skinny enough to potentially weasel up and down. The scuff marks on the inside of the closet were pretty telling. It took a while for the police to make their way over in response to my non-emergency call, but it quickly gathered their interest when the first responding officer reported that everyone missed the first time they did a half-hour search of my home. 3 unmarked cars arrived after the initial squad car. My neighbors were uncharacteristically quiet once the first cruiser rolled up. Around noon, I offered a folding ladder, and the police looked up into the blisteringly hot attic. A hole had been cut through the insulation and a spot in the corner wide enough for a small or slender person to fit through. I was questioned again downstairs for about an hour before I heard more voices upstairs than I remember going up there. Before I could ask, a familiar face appeared at my door. My landlord Ahmed looked concerned and astonished, which was a new expression after the third, after his "can I take your money" and general resting get lost face. "What happened?" he asked. "What's going on? Are you all right?" He walked into my home without invitation and up to me on my sofa. I asked him if he was there to fix my cracked window. Everything else happened without my direct involvement. I remained a guest in my own home for most of the day as police took pictures and marked up and down my stairs. I learned that my assumption about the attic work was wrong, that workers had access to specific units to get around the firewalls between them. In fact, there were holes in the firewall that allowed workers to enter the roof in one unit and run the entire length of the building. It was a measure that saved time and footsteps, but was a violation of several laws and codes, meaning that Ahmed's life was about to become much more complex and expensive. These gaps in the firewalls also allowed someone to drill a hole in their own ceiling and run the length of 11 other homes, walking on the same boards laid by the property owners that muffled their presence. Every single unit in that block had a similar hole to the one in my ceiling. Furthermore, at one time the building had been wired for cable through the roof, and holes that had been cut to fish cable into the upstairs bedrooms had been plugged up years earlier during an upgrade. Some of those patches had been replaced with removable plugs, giving someone a clear view into various bedrooms in the attic. Police found a step stool with a rope tied to the top step. It was stashed in the corner of the roof over my next door neighbor's unit, but that's not the weirdest thing, though. All the evidence pointed to the main access point being the smaller bedroom in my neighbor's unit. The police did not arrest Funhouse Man or Troll Lady for the crime. Around 3 in the afternoon, police had recovered items stolen from other units along with various controlled substances. Trolled Old Lady was arrested for violating the terms of her bond. Funhouse Man was taken in for the drugs, and I was shocked to see a third person, not Chuck, walk out of the townhouse in cuffs. I'd never met him before, for he was thinner than Funhouse Man by half. An old man's face in a young man's body, with scars and bruises all over his skin that I've only ever seen on corpses, white and waxy. He was naked except for soiled basketball shorts, and he literally recoiled as if allergic to the outside air and the sun, and had to be dragged shoeless into the cruiser. I don't know who that kid was, but I got the feeling that he never left the townhouse ever, maybe not even the attic. The thought that this skeletal creep was looking in on me and had access to my life makes me overly cautious these days. I have eyes everywhere in my home, and I took pains to inspect the smallest spaces in and around the property. I often wake up in the night seeing that face peering at me through a window or from the darkness. It's been a long time, and everyone I mentioned in this story by name is dead. I don't know about the kid though, and I never got a name, and I was unable to find him in any police records. Maybe he didn't really exist. Maybe he didn't show up in any records and is languishing in prison as a John Doe, or maybe he's out there lurking in some upper level of an apartment building, or hiding inside the basements or walls. I've rarely ever felt truly home since then. The former officer told me this story, and I will let you decide what you think of it. The officer had responded to a parent's call to arrest their son, whom they were convinced had relapsed on meth. What had tipped them off was that the son had started blasting both thrash metal and porn on max volume from his bedroom and locked himself in. Communication with the kid was impossible with the noise. However, The officer's partner had been able to glance into the kid's window and could see he was sitting motionless in front of his computer. He was shirtless, but otherwise everything seemed normal. With permission from the parents, the officers decided to push through the lock. Moans and groans and relentless guitars deafened their ear. The only light illuminating the room was the bluish H of the computer monitor. The kid's face was a distorted grin. Stretching to his lips' furthest limits, he wasn't shirtless. He was in fact naked and drenched in sweat, and in his right hand, set like a chalice, were his testicles, which he had ripped off in a flurry of drug-induced self-mutilation. This past weekend my parents had an experience. I did not make much of it, and neither did the rest of my family. This parent got up in the morning for work, however they were washing some dishes from the night before. I woke up and was able to hear them wash the dishes. And everything. No one else in the home was awake besides one of our pets. My parents came into the room and asked for my sibling. I mentioned that they were asleep upstairs. We have a single room upstairs, somewhat like an attic, but used as a bedroom, which houses my other sibling. At this point my parent told me to swear that my sibling was upstairs, and I explained that yes, they were, as I had not seen them come down. My parent then said that they had seen my sibling run around the house and could feel the feet and items move as they ran. They were so sure that they walked over to peek around the couch to scare them while playing hide and seek. We did not discuss this further. However, more recently I've also seen the same sibling at home despite everyone being away. The sibling is still in grade school, so they wake up and they taken to school by one of my parents. I was also getting ready to leave for work, and as I was heading out of the bathroom, our cat ran and hid behind the bed. He's a kitten, so he's very playful. The hiding is not suspicious to me, at least, as he'd been running around and playing by himself throughout the morning. I was leaving from the bathroom and heading towards the bed to play with a cat. My bedroom door is in front of the door that leads to the dining room / common area. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the siblings sitting on the dining table eating breakfast with only hair covering their face, and I even made their clothes. As I went to play with the cat, it occurred to me to tell the sibling to stop playing with the cat and to hurry up, or they'd be late for school. As I walk out of my bedroom, I remember my parents had already left with them, and I was the only one in the house at the time. I used to work closing shift at Pizza Hut. It was the site of the only unsolved murder case of my town. This kid Randall had been murdered closing a Pizza Hut and robbed. They didn't find him till morning anyway. All of us that worked closing knew it was haunted, and Randall was still around. Well, one night it was just me and another closer when we heard footsteps above us, and you could see the dust fall from the ceiling with each step, but no one was there other than us. We're closing shop and I see someone standing at the counter wearing an old Pizza Hut shirt watching us, so I can tell him I'll be with him in a moment, and grabbed my other closer who was watching the cameras. He never saw anyone come in or out, and the doors never dinged to alert us. We walked back out and he's still there. Turn around to check orders and he's gone. I was pretty freaked out, and my coworker was just like, well, now you've officially met Randall. He's a good ghost. Always say good night to him. After that, my hobby is mountain hiking. The kind of mountains I like to hike are the ones with no roads, no other people, and where wild vegetables grown off the beaten track. Hiking. Sometimes on these hikes I come across strange or unusual things. For example, I once saw an albino antelope, and on another occasion I saw an eagle the size of a fully grown man. However, the weirdest incident was the time I came across a family impossibly far into the mountains. It was a weekday afternoon. I was hiking along the prefectural border between Miyagi and Yamagata and Akita. There was a forest of huge beech trees which made it quite easy to walk as it got dark. This is a place that not an everyday person would hike. Only local people to this mountain range would probably know about it, or people like me who enjoy hiking and have GPS. It was secluded. As I was walking along a small ridge, I noticed a small stream flowing below. At the edge of the stream, I saw a man standing there. I first thought, he must be doing a spot of fishing. Then I noticed that he wasn't alone. 4 other people stood with him. They were all standing in the river. I couldn't see clearly because they must have been at least 100 m away, but I was sure there were 4 people stood in the river. 2 appeared to be children. I don't know why, but I thought they may be on the verge of ending their own lives together. I mean, to come all the way out here into this secluded mountain river alone, so close to dark. If that were the case, I planned to intervene and try to talk them out of it. I hope that wasn't the case, of course, but either way, I was interested in finding out what was going on, so I used my binoculars to take a closer look. Just as I thought, there were 4 people facing away from me, 2 children and 2 adults. I watched for a moment, waiting for them to turn my way so that I could catch a glimpse of their faces, but they didn't move at all. I must have been watching them for 5 minutes, and they didn't move. Then it dawned on me, they're mannequins. Someone must have put them here as a prank or a trap. I decided to go for a closer look, since my first thought was to check on the family. Anyway, I quietly crept closer. I didn't want to be noticed. In my mind, I was planning my escape route. Jumping into the river itself crossed my mind. If something terrible were to happen. As I drew closer, my predictions came true. There were 4 mannequins before me, 2 adult and 2 children, all dressed up out here in the middle of nowhere. I was disgusted. My body shivered. I couldn't logically think why they were here. I thought to myself, someone did this. They must be absolutely not right. In the head, I was now close enough to see the details on the mannequin. Each one had a name painted on its front. Every mannequin was peppered with small holes, like bullet holes, like a shotgun bullet trail. The resistance was a broken box cutter blade sticking out of one of the child mannequins' backs. That was enough for me. I was terrified, and I began to make my way back down the mountain. Even as I write this now, I'm shivering. Those creeping mannequin doors with marks all up and down them. Someone carried them all the way there too. Do what and why? They're not like mannequins. Either they were bulky, heavy wooden ones. If I had to carry one myself, I'd have to stop for a while to take rest, and that was just one, but there were 4 of them. It would take forever to get them there. This happened around 2 years ago, and I haven't gone back to check if they're still there, but my guess is that they probably are. I was a paranormal investigator sat up in an old house. There were 5 of us sitting in the addition of the first floor, where the last owner took her last breath. We were listening to the history when from above we heard it for footsteps walking back and forth, the light swinging overhead with force. All 5 of us were in this room and no one else was there. It was bizarre. We decided to head upstairs, but left a bell on the bed, letting the supposed ghost know if she wanted us that she could ring the bell. As we headed up the very narrow and steep steps to the 2nd story, what did we hear? The bell. We stood there all in the stairway, deciding either to go up or go down. We didn't want to split up because then any footsteps above or below had to be discounted, as it could easily be us. We decided to check on the bell and then go up. There were other things that happened in that house. Some people claimed to have been touched or felt hands on them. We would hear scratches or whispers and footprints above us if on the 1st floor, or below off if on the 2nd story. On the 2nd story, I did do an investigation by myself while everyone was outside, and I wanted pictures, but nothing happened. I went back here 2 times and got some EVPs, but the bell was the craziest thing. From that location, the second location will be called the theater. This was the last investigation I had with this paranormal group before the tragedy happened. Car accident not related to anything paranormal in which we lost 50% of the group. This theater still haunts my dreams. Something yanked on my necklace and the boiler almost blew up. My voice recorder suddenly went off without me touching it, not once but 3 times. The last time without batteries in it. I got separated from the others in the basement tunnels and found myself facing a shadow of a person standing before me. When leaving, I suddenly felt very ill and had to pull over and throw up. As I left the city, I got suddenly blurry. There was an overall sense of dread, like if I didn't get out something was going to happen. Back at home, my neck had scratches from where my necklace was pulled and my arm was bruised. I think spirits can feast on vulnerability, and during the theater investigation I was very vulnerable due to an encounter with a man as I was walking from my car to the theater, so I think that shook me so much I opened myself to paranormal, and the paranormal loves to mess with weak individuals, so it chose me to mess with. At the first location, I wasn't stressed out at all, unable to keep my mental health strong, and therefore the paranormal chose to focus on those who had opened and vulnerable minds. I still tried to on as many paranormal investigations that I can get my hands on to. I managed to be a part of a non-taped investigation with the ghost hunters in Kentucky. Went on ghost tours in London and Hawaii, in Poland, and I plan on visiting Waverly Hills and other haunted hotspots, but I'll never go back to that theater even for $1 million. I experienced what I had to offer and I feel satisfied. There is no further business I have with that place. However, with the first location, I feel we have become good acquaintances and can't wait for my next visit. I feel like I haven't experienced anything that place has to offer, so until I do, I don't mind dropping in and saying hi. Life can change in the blink of an eye, and you're not always prepared for it. I certainly wasn't. In the year 2000, I had been married to my husband about 3 years. We were having a pretty steady life. I had just left my job and was about to have a baby. After having the baby, we were overjoyed. We had just moved into a new house, and because of my husband's job, we were able to afford it, and we're looking and hoping to get somewhere a bit bigger in the next few years. My baby was only about 4 weeks old when out of nowhere tragedy struck. My husband was hit by an idiot driver who was on the wrong side of the road and died in the sea vision. There was nothing I could have done that week. I buried my husband and my life was thrown into turmoil, not only because of the huge emotional shift that had to happen for me, but of course the disappearance of the financial support that he provided. His job gave little in financial aid after his passing, and of course without an income one had to find work for myself. My job was very specialized and it was a bit hard to find a job with child care needs at that time for me, so after a lot of juggling I managed to sort out a steady income, but it wasn't as much as I had before, and when the lease ended I unfortunately relinquished the house. That was the last time I ever saw my husband alive. It was a hard thing to do, but for the best, I suppose. My daughter and I initially moved back in with my parents, but they were a bit overbearing, so after a while I decided to find somewhere where we could both live together happily. For the time being, my job wasn't in the greatest area, but deciding that proximity to the office was probably best, I took residence in one of the cheap houses available nearby. It was grody to say the least, absolutely minuscule, a very small living space, 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom, but it was enough for my tiny family. The loss of my husband and complete collapse of my life thus far was still taking a huge toll on my life, and I wasn't myself, but I had to try and be strong for my baby girl. After I arrived at the new house and got settled in, I realized that my neighbors were never in, if I even had Any next door was a house that looked like it hadn't been done up in at least 20 years. The grass was long on the front lawn, litter was thrown everywhere, and it looked like no one ever came in or out of that place. The windows were so dirty, even though the curtains were never drawn, you could never see inside, and on the few times I arrived was outside at night, I would never see any lights on or hear any noises from the house. I thought the house might have been abandoned or condemned and never really thought much about it. In the weeks that followed the adjustment of my life, I started to get really uneasy feelings while being in my home. I told myself it was just the grief and that it would take a long time to heal, but then something happened that changed all that. One morning at around 6 a.m. I was having a shower. I tried to shower before my daughter woke up, and as I was showering I swore I heard something on the ceiling. Instinctually I look up, but as the shower was steamy I didn't actually see anything. After I got back from work that day, I look around the bathroom and see nothing. I told myself it was just a house noise. One thing that is probably worth mentioning was that mine and the neighbor's house were connected by a shared wall. The bathroom happened to be on the shared wall. We had another conclusion I got to was that it could have been from the neighbor's house, but as I said previously, as I'd never seen any form of human activity there, my instinct told me otherwise, so I tried to forget about it. As the week went by, I found one of the strangest things I did find. It was a sliver of ceiling. It looked like it had been cut, and when I looked up after finding it on the floor, there was indeed a hole in the ceiling. If it had been cut, it had been done very badly and very roughly, but with an amorphous shape. I looked up and wondered how the hell it had fallen down. I tried to get the step ladder to put it back up, but wasn't tall enough to slot the piece back in. Frustrated, I didn't know what was going on and resolved to call the landlord the next day to try and get it sorted out. I left that patch of ceiling on the kitchen counter and forgot all about it for many months. My landlord was never called. I completely forgot about it. Then weeks later, I find another sliver of ceiling, but this one in the bathroom. I was looking up at where the hole was, and it was in between the shower and the toilet. This time it was starting to creep me out. If someone was in the ceiling, well, as unlikely as it was, they would be able to see me shower and do my business, which really freaked me out. It was a very tiny piece of ceiling though, and after finding the forgotten piece from the other room, I resolved to this time call the landlord. When I finally got around to calling the landlord, I asked him about this, and if he could please fix it. He told me he would send someone round, but said that we shouldn't go up into the attic as that wasn't in the lease agreement, so I left it at that. Days went by, and after chasing him, he never sent anyone over to fix it, and I quickly forgot, dealing with lots of stuff at the time, so it wasn't at the forefront of my thoughts. Well, that of course all changed a few weeks later. I was just about to take a shower and was sitting on the toilet when I hear movement from above and a tiny amount of dust falls from the ceiling. Instinctually I look up, and that's when I hear shuffling leaving my attic space and going towards the Durek neighbor's house next door. I cover myself and start shrieking. I was sure saw someone was spying down on me. This time I called the police. After an interesting conversation between the landlord and the police, they managed to open the attic on my part of the house. It turns out that someone had been living in the Darrell house that the landlord owned but didn't actually rent out to anyone. It was a homeless man. He had been living there for who knows how long and had cut the holes in my ceiling and had been spying on me. I felt so violated. Someone had been spying on me while I was naked, while I was in the bathroom, and it repulsed me beyond words. I told the landlord that I wanted to move out, that this was unacceptable and it could have all been avoided if he could have just fixed the damn holes. When I asked him to, the police didn't get involved at this point, but their presence being quite pronounced, I think that's why he relented and let us terminate the lease early. I ended up moving back through my parents' house and got an apology, my full deposit and half a month's rent back as another form of apology, so that's something I suppose, but it really destroyed my sense of trust, and honestly I'm always checking for holes and look up at the ceiling whenever I enter a new space, check for double-sided mirrors in public bathrooms and the like, because you never know what kind of pervert could be watching you when you're trying to do your private business. It really shattered that for me. I just hope that it never happens to my daughter. My best friend was an officer for about 5 years, and this was his worst best story. He received a call from dispatch for a welfare check, and when he got to the home, of course, there was no response. He mentioned a pungent smell of death as he stepped foot in the door, knowing damn well this wasn't going to be good. After regrouping himself from the smell, he began to walk down this long hallway where he assumed the smell was coming from. He was halfway down the hall when he noticed blood everywhere in the next room. We are talking floor to ceiling. As he turned the corner into that room, he saw a little ankle biter laying there chewing on something and really didn't think much of it. He then panned the room for a second before he noticed a guy laying in a recliner holding onto a shotgun pointed at his mouth. This man had literally blown his brains out, had half of a head, and his dog was chewing on a piece of his skull/face. The smell was so awful due to the fact this guy was sitting in his house with no air conditioning in the summer heat for 3 days. Talk about a fun start to your day. I grew up in a farmhouse that was built in 1898 that had a chimney. For some reason I was looking into the chimney and saw a bag looking thing, so I reached into to grab it, and when I did, something grabbed me. I ended up with bruises all the way around my wrist, and there were teeth in the small burlap bag. The second thing was me and a friend were out hunting on one of his dad's fields. This particular field was completely surrounded by woods, and it was on one side and I was on the other, both of us looking towards the end of the field where we had spotted deer. Something that had predator-like camel making no sound or anything hovered in the middle of the field between us. It looked like a constant heat wave distorting the fog, and maybe it was because it caused a lot of moisture in the air that the area to condense into droplets you could hear hitting the crops. I don't know what it was, because I don't believe in UFOs. I honestly can't grasp the size or shape of the object, but it seemed like something was just there, barely beyond perception. I almost got shot or stabbed or something while delivering pizzas. The area of town which the order came from was sketchy as hell. Let me give you a breakdown. It was a pretty meth-heavy area, plus the city where I attend college. Pizza deliveries, pay for rent, you see, had been absolutely screwed over by Reaganomics and never recovered. Several mental institutions in the area were closed in the S due in part to lack of federal funding, and the nonviolent residents just sort of stayed around, plus manufacturing died, plus a chemical spill of some nature, plus poor infrastructure blight. In other words, it was quite jarring. I would deliver pizzas to one address where a toddler in a diaper gave me money cause the only adult was nodding off in the corner from who knows what, and then go to a frat house where a bunch of kids from rich families on Long Island were drunkenly fun of my uniform before tipping an absurdly low amount, if anything, but that is just for context. I'm one of those people who was built rather large and looked as imposing as possible while wearing a Domino's uniform and have a resting "I want to die and take someone with me" face. So anyway, I get to where I'm going, I ring the buzzer and there's no answer, but the door is unlocked and it's an apartment building, and this is an uncommon. So I walk in and I'm immediately greeted by a cacophony of yelling and screaming from somewhere in the building that gets louder the closer I get to the apartment. I knock on the door of the apartment and all of a sudden everything goes quiet, really quiet, eerily quiet, but no one answers. I'm about to knock again and a guy comes from around a blind corner in the hallway. This guy's huge, at least 66 and 300, inked to the gills, some of it identifiable as prison in and gang tattoos. He has his hand inside his pocket, he looks at me and I look at him, and eventually after a few seconds he says, "Boy, you don't want to be here." Right now I said okay thank you, left the pizza, walked as quickly as I could back down the stairs and back to my car. I genuinely did not believe he was messing with me, and I remain deeply grateful that he warned me that day to leave. When I was at university, I had a good friend who was a really good-look person, but she never had a boyfriend or showed any interest in men. I was very curious about this, so I asked her the reason why I never saw her with a boyfriend. She said there are two reasons. She told me that she had a boyfriend in high school who became obsessed with her when she couldn't take it any longer. She spoke to him about mutually ending the relationship. He exploded with rage and attacked her. The second was before university. She commuted to school on the train. One day she found something in a bag, a mysterious sealed envelope. She guessed that someone slipped it into her bag on board the crowded train. The letter was very simple and it only had a few words: love at first sight. It was a creepy kind of love letter. It wasn't addressed to her, it didn't have her name written on the envelope. It just really creeped her out. Thereafter she found a new letter in her bag each week. She said she did nothing to encourage them, and since this freaked her out, she decided to stop traveling to school via the train. A few days after she did this, she began to receive phone calls from a number she didn't recognize. Oh God, she thought, this is freaky. She didn't answer the call but saved the number as stalker ? A few days passed, and she set up an answer phone service to see if the stalker would leave a message, and she was surprised to find out they did. Her hands were shaking as she played the first message. Why did you go away? Why did you leave me? She said that she began to develop a fear of leaving the house and then a fear of men. It took her years to recover from the fear instilled from not only her ex-boyfriend but the train stalker as well. Once she had her confidence back, she attended university. I wanted to help her get a sense of trust in men again, and as there are so many good men out there, I knew that I was meddling, but I wanted to help, so I thought I would invite her to a party with male and females attending, and I floated the idea to her, and she reluctantly agreed. The day of the party arrived, and I invited some of my best friends, male and female. I warned them all that my friend was nervous and asked them to be on their best behavior. My friends understood and promised to make the atmosphere great for the party. The party was held by our college mentor. I was proud of her. She spoke to a man for the first time in a long time. They had a lengthy conversation, and it was really good to see the guy she spoke to had the exact same taste in music and movies as she, to the point where they had the same favorite song. They even came from the same area. They could have talked all night. They had so much in common. I felt like it was fate that brought these two together. When the party was over, he asked her for her contact information, and I knew this would be a big step for her, and I could tell she was happy with this, but she was too shy to show it. She said to me after the party on their way home, "I'm so happy I can fall in love like anyone else now," and I was so happy for her. I just felt as excited as she did. A few days later, she received an email from him. She was pleased, as you can imagine, and I respected him for taking things slowly. After about a week of emailing, she came running into my room to tell me that he had invited her on a date. The day of the date rolled by. My friend didn't want to be late, so she left her home with plenty of time. He sent her an email stating, "I'll be there shortly and I'll let you know when I arrive." My friend decided to wait at a cafe for him. The cafe was crowded, so she emailed him her number and asked him to call her when he got there. About 15 minutes passed and the phone rang. It's him, she thought, and then she pulled out her phone. On the screen, the name stalker ? Was displayed. Her heartbeat rose. Old familiar thoughts of fear crept forward from the back of her mind. She said herself and told herself, "I'm okay, my boyfriend is coming, I'll be safe." She decided to be brave and answer the phone. "Hello," she said. "Hi, I'm here, where are you?" It was the voice of the Man she had met at the party, her new boyfriend. There was no mistake, he must have been the one who put the letters in her bag on the train. She called me as she was leaving and all she said was, "I have no luck with men." She escaped the letter stalker with the help of her friends and colleagues. I don't know what they did, but they made him back off. I am shocked and somewhat in awe at the stalker's fascination and persistence with my friend. I wish he'd have just left her alone. Before I begin, I want to give a bit of context. This was about 7 years ago and my boyfriend at the time and I had just gotten back together after a brief separation. Jerry's brother had gotten married and bought a house, so Jerry and I agreed to stay in the home to clean it while they returned. Looking back, that's a little bit weird to me, but whatever. I was happy to help. One night while we were staying in the home, Jerry and I were unpacking and washing dishes. Jerry wanted to celebrate the fact that we had gotten together, so he left me to grab some ingredients to cook me dinner. While he was gone, I put Pandora on and kept washing dishes. The phone I used at the time had a speaker on the back, so I left my phone on the couch face down playing music. It's important to note that my phone had about 15% battery left. After about 15 minutes or so, the music cut off. I figured my battery had died, so I kept on washing the dishes. However, I couldn't ignore the eerie feeling that filled the home. When there wasn't any sound, I quickly finished washing the dishes as quickly as I could and walked over to my phone. When I turned it over, I was shocked to see that my phone hadn't died. It had about 10% battery left. Pandora was still on and the volume was still up. I sat on the couch and began messing around with it, trying to get the music to play again, but nothing worked. Now it's important to note the layout of the house. As I'm sitting on the couch, I'm facing the kitchen. The front door and dining room are to my left, and there's an archway to the hallway to my right. If you were to stand in the archway to the hall, there'd be a bathroom in front of you, a bedroom with windows to your right, and a bedroom with no windows to your left. As I'm on the couch messing with my phone, I see a shadow pass by the archway super quickly, almost as quickly as a blink of an eye. What do I do? What every first victim of a movie serial killer does. I follow it. My brain registers the figure as a woman with a long dress and long black hair, but I couldn't see her face. I followed her down the hallway, of course, into the dark bedroom with no windows. The only thing in this room was a closet with older metal accordion doors which were slightly open. When I stepped into the doorway of this room, I froze. I couldn't move or speak. She stood in the corner of the room opposite me, and we stood there frozen. It felt like I was there for an hour, but it was only a few seconds. Almost immediately after I walked into the room, Jerry came back. When he didn't see me in the kitchen or living room, he yelled out, "Babe," but when I didn't answer, he yelled out again, "Babe, baby." As much as I wanted to scream back, I couldn't. All of a sudden, the accordion door started shaking. She started screaming and coming towards me. In my head, I'm screaming and trying to do anything I can to get myself to move. When I'm finally sure this is how it ends, I get plucked off the ground and popped over Jerry's shoulder. Next thing I know, he sets me down on the couch and asks me, "Why did you follow her? You know not to follow them. Why did you follow her?" Jerry happened to have some sage spray. Again, now thinking back on this, all weird. How did he know about her? After we lit a few candles, the eerie feeling went away and nothing else happened, but that is something I will never forget. I've seen something similar after that, like years after, but I wasn't with Jerry or even in the same house. I truly wonder what it was I experienced that night. I have this friend who her and her mom are very witchy. Like, her mom is one scary woman. They had this extremely big and old expensive house. I went and stayed with them one summer when I was about 17. We get there and the house is wonderful. They are bringing us through all the rooms and get to one place where they tell us to never open. Fast forward a week, no one's gone in, but all the bathrooms in the house are being used except for the one that's in this room, so I think nothing of it. Go into the bathroom and take a leak. Now when I tell you, I felt this absolutely chilling thing grab my shoulder. It was big. It felt like fingers down the front of my chest while it's sitting on my shoulder. I freeze, and after what seemed like forever I heard my name clicked back to reality, finished my business, and walked out. I found out I was there for over 40 minutes. Fast forward a few more days, and I go and stand in the pool at around 11:30 at night. I'm standing in the pool with my phone when it happens. Something grabs my shoulder and I freeze. I drop my phone straight in the water and apparently stood there for over 2 hours until someone found me. To this day, being nearly 30, I still to this day experience this strange sensation about twice a year, but I don't lose hours this time, merely minutes, and I still find it creepy. When I was 18, my boyfriend at the time picked me up and said we were going to see a house he's interested in renting. Before grabbing lunch, his mom was the real estate agent, so she was going to meet us there. Cool, no problem. We pull up to the driveway, and that's when I start to feel a bit sick. I was totally fine before, so I figured the sensation would pass. As we're walking up to the door, his mom must have seen us because she came out to say hello. We walked back inside and they stood there talking in the foyer area. I went right to the master bedroom and stared at a corner between the bed and the bathroom, and I felt insanely nauseous at this point, and I told myself I found a bathroom because I felt sick. Nothing spooky. My boyfriend came in and asked me what was up. All of a sudden I started spouting that Gertrude had died in the house of heart attack, and I felt like she was still here. He started laughing and said that I can just say I don't like the house, and I told him I wasn't kidding. To ask his mom, it's probably worth mentioning at this point, I've always had a bit of an empathic side, but my family tried to tell me we have a special intuition, and I didn't believe it until right now. I stayed frozen in that bedroom while he went to ask. In hushed tone I hear him ask, and his mom responds, "What? How did she know that?" "Yes, a woman named Gertrude died recently. She was 87 and had a heart attack in the home." My legs gave out and I floor. I don't have the address for this place, didn't do any research on it, and I don't know who lived there. There was no explanation for what happened other than something paranormal. Okay, so we get a call to do a welfare check. Someone called the station house because they hadn't heard from their mom, and if we could pretty please swing by to check on her. Fine. We get to the apartment building, knock on the door, and when there's inevitably no answer, we grab the super to open the door for us. The first sign that things were going terribly wrong was that the chain was still on the door. The second was the god-awful stench coming from the place that told us something was quite dead inside. As before, it's dark in there and none of the lights worked because they had burnt out in the time the poor lady had been sitting there. We found her on the couch. Positive Q sign. Hang your tongue out your mouth like you're dead. You get the idea. And smelled the beginning stages of decomposition. So it's the DOA, the cops in the living room, and the Sue standing in the doorway of this dark apartment, and we obviously have our FL flashlights trained on the guest of honor. At this point, the dead person raises a hand to her eye in a very zombie-is fashion and goes exactly like that. So totally zombie, right? Having seen enough, we again run out the house and we're like, we've just seen a ghost. The super, who's not privy to the rise of the living dead, sees two 6 feet 3 inches cops thundering down the hallway at him and figures this is his cue to get moving. Too sadly for him, we over to him and his little stubby legs and leave him to be dined up by the zombie. Survival of the fittest, right? We got down the next flight before we figured that even if it is a zombie, it was an old lady who we could probably kick her ass. We went back to the apartment and called an ambulance. Apparently she had a stroke alone in the apartment and sat there for days. The hand and vocalizations were really what was left of her brain responding to stimulus. We went to the hospital the next day before work, but she was too far gone. There is this curious thing in my childhood home. My family call it the empty spot. You see, when you walk over to it, you get a sensation in your stomach like you're falling. That's the best way I can describe it. But there's another aspect to it too, one which many people will find unbelievable, and I respect that. I would be skeptical too, but it happened. You see, this one time me and my dad and my brother were getting some coffee and my dad dropped his phone. We all heard it hit the floor, but the phone was gone. It had vanished. It would not ring if we called it, or anything. It was a very bizarre thing. Dad obviously wasn't happy and had to get a new phone, but a few years after that, me and my brother were hanging out and heard something hit the floor. Curious, we went over to see what it was and were flabbergasted where right there on the ground in the empty spot was Dad's phone, just as if it had been dropped moments ago. But this is years in the future. Now we look at each other in fast inattention and horror. How the hell did this even happen? It's honestly one of the weirdest things I've ever heard of, and wish to know what exactly causes it. When I first came to look at the apartment I'm living at now, the people that were moving out were the ones to show the apartment to us. There was no one in the building present. They were a real scumbag looking pair. The guy just says out of the blue that he was going to prison and that his wife could not afford the place anymore, so I didn't think too much of it, and we moving it. Few weeks later, while talking to some of the neighbors, there are 2 tow houses and 2 buildings in the same development. They asked me if I knew what happened in my apartment. I was like, no. Then they proceeded to tell me that the dude that lived there was off to prison for sexually assaulting a little girl in that apartment. Talk about information I didn't need to know. The worst part is that his wife got a new place on the first floor, right on the corner where all the kids would pass to take a shortcut to school. When this monster got out of jail, they let him move back in again. Who thought it would be a good idea to let a convicted pedophile moved into a secluded place that had tons of kids walking by all day? He did not last very long. Every time he managed to leave his home, he was yelled at, hissed at, chased, and threatened. Still, that level of decision-making is maybe the most disturbing in the whole story. I always suspected my place of being haunted. One day, when I was home, my phone kept falling on the floor. Whenever I walked out of the room, I would hear a thump, and it would be my phone in the middle of the room. This happened about 3 times during the day. Right before I went to bed, I put my phone on my nightstand, and as I was walking out of the room, I heard a bang on the wall. I walked out of the room, and my phone was once again on the floor. I picked up my phone and put it back on my nightstand and said out loud, "If someone's here, push my phone on the floor again." I literally watched my phone slide across my nightstand and fall to the floor. I was completely shaken, so I put my phone back on the nightstand and asked it to push it off again, and it happened again. If I wasn't so damn cheap, I would be out of there. There I am, a pizza delivery driver, and this particular incident still perplexes me to this day. It was a late summer evening at 10:30 p.m. August 2nd, years ago, as I made my way through a wealthy neighborhood to deliver pizzas. The area was generally well lit, but there were patches of darkness throughout. I navigated through the apartment clusters and encountered one of those dimly lit spots where I had to rely on the headlights of my vehicle to locate the correct building number. My attention was completely absorbed in trying to find the right address, making me somewhat oblivious to my surroundings. Unbeknownst to me, merely 5 feet away from my vehicle stood 2 individuals in the middle of the street. To my surprise, they were completely naked. It wasn't an alarming sight, but rather one that left me utterly bewildered, and they seemed engrossed in each other's presence, exchanging glances without moving an inch. Although the sight didn't make me uncomfortable, it did raise numerous questions in my mind. Nonetheless, I had a job to complete, so I cautiously maneuvered my car around the motionless couple and proceeded towards the customer's location. Upon reaching the destination, I awaited the customer's arrival, keeping a watchful eye in my rearview mirror to ensure the naked couple didn't approach me or cause any disturbance. But as the minutes went by and the anxiety grew, I was starting to get impatient, until finally the customer opened the door. I promptly handed over the pizza while maintaining a subtle vigilance towards this couple. As I left the customer home and glanced back to the naked duo, they had vanished without a trace. It was as if they had evaporated into thin air, leaving me with no answers or explanations. They couldn't have gone anywhere that quickly. I'm sure of it. It will remain a mystery to me, and I wonder what the hell I saw that day. Some kids in my primary school did the Charlie game, and a girl's desk flipped over. I remember it being really weird because we had those metal desks that only seat one if they were pushed. The desks landed on their side, but when the girl's desk was flipped it landed on its top. I think we all ran out screaming after that, and we had to get the school blessed. There was also a lot of worry about the demons sticking to someone. The girls whose desk flipped over, there were a lot of conflicting reports over how to get rid of a demon. Some people said you had to read the entire Bible, others said you had to burn the paper you played the game on. Some of those primary school friends ended up in secondary school with me. They did what we saw at the same day. It's part of the reason why I never toy around with stuff like Ouija boards or summoning spirits. No. Thank you. When I was 14 to 15, I came home a little tipsy. My room was on the top floor of our house, and I went straight to bed. While lying down, I heard someone trying to get someone's attention. The sound was, we've been living here for the longest time, but I remember there were stories of maids being murdered by the previous owners before, but everyone thought it was just old wives' tale, so I really didn't pay too much heed to it. I tried to ignore it and realized it's getting a little louder. Since I was a little inebriated, I found the courage to call out, "If you're really a ghost, then prove it." I then felt a slap inside my right thigh, which made me immediately sit up straight. I stood up and reached for the light and looked inside my room, but no one was there. I pulled down my pants and noticed a red welt-shaped hand forming with the fingers pointing towards my gonads, so the slap seemed like it was made by someone sitting at the end of the bed. Needless to say, I bunked with my brother for a few months after that. There was a huge park near my house on weekends and public holidays. It gets really busy, however, at night. The atmosphere of the park is entirely different. Back when I had just moved to the area, I was unpacking. I had so much to do when there wasn't an end in sight, so I decided to go to the park for a change of pace. The park had swings and slides, plenty of stuff. Next to a public toilet, there was a phone booth illuminated in the darkness, and it crept me out a bit later. When I had finally finished unpacking, it was around 1 a.m. and I decided to go to a convenience store. The whole time I was walking, I felt as if someone was watching me. I didn't want to look over my shoulder at any point. There was the phone booth. Ordinarily, I would walk past it without paying it much attention, but for some reason I stopped and stared blankly at it. After a few minutes, I snapped out of it and ran to the convenience store. I bought a few things, sweets, a bento box, and was on my way home. Halfway through the park, I realized I was in desperate need of the toilet. It was unavoidable. I had to use the toilet at the park. At that time of night, I was the only one in the park. It was very frightening, and as I was washing my hands, I heard a phone ring. I checked, but it wasn't my mobile phone. It was coming from somewhere very close to the toilet, though the pay phone was ringing. What perfect timing. Two thoughts entered my mind. The first, curiosity. What if I answered it? The second, fear. Do not answer it. In the end, fear won. I ran back to the house while the phone rang behind me. Back home, I sat down on my sofa and tried to organize my thoughts. I was still thinking about the phone booth. From my window, I could see the park and the phone booth, and I wasn't sure if it was still ringing. I watched it for a few moments as a man appeared from the nearby toilet. The light of the toilet illuminated him. In his right hand, he was holding a mobile phone. In his left, something edged like a tool or a knife. It only took 2 minutes to run back to my house from the park. I was just there. I thought there was no one else in the toilet with me. My suspicion was that the man was waiting 2 hours 11 minutes and 4 seconds in one of the toilet stools and dialed the payphone number and would creep up to whoever answered the phone from behind and murder them. What if my curiosity were greater than my fear? Whenever I think about what could have happened, I shudder. It was late Sunday evening around 9 o'clock p.m. I was in my room just playing video games like usual until I heard the shower turn on. The bathroom was right beside my room and the door requires some slamming to be shut properly. I didn't hear the door being slammed but disregarded it as my own lack of attention to it since I was fully immersed in my video game. About an hour later my game was finished, but I noticed that the shower was still on for some reason. Now I for one take long showers too, usually around 40 minutes or so, but no one else in the family usually takes that long, so I asked my dad if my aunt was home because my parents and brother were all downstairs in the living room. No one else could have been there besides my aunt. However, my dad said my aunt hadn't come home yet. I told my dad that someone was in the bathroom taking a shower. He went to check and the lights were still on, but the shower was now off. We knock on the door once, twice, no answer. He opens the door and there's no one there, not a single soul. My dad thought I was pranking him, but I told him I wasn't. He still doesn't believe me. Who was there? How did the shower turn on? Why were the lights still on with a closed door? I'll never know the answer to these questions, but to make it even creepier, I dreamt about a dark figure with glowing eyes standing at the top of the staircase that is on the same floor as the bathroom, and the room beside mine always has a slight cool breeze circulating in there. I'm a 19-year-old female. I live in a small town in South Carolina. I've lived here my whole life in the same house, which was built in 1971. My father bought it with his ex-wife, and my mom, his current wife, moved in 2001, and I was born in 2002. I'll start at the beginning, but I will mention that I do have a rather messed up memory. For as long as I've been alive, there have been footsteps in the attic. I've always tried to rationalize it, just thinking this is an old house, it's bound to make noise, but a few months ago I heard bells jingling in the attic like our Christmas decorations. It was above the bathroom, and the footsteps are usually above my room, which is right next door. I told my dad about it, and he went to check for animals but couldn't find any, couldn't even find a place where they have gotten in. He told me I was hearing things and probably needed to go to bed, so I did. Then I started hearing what I could only describe as footsteps coming from inside the wall. My mom heard it too, so did our cats. At one point it was behind our coffee maker, and we were both standing there scared that it was a mouse or something. Our cat Katniss was desperately trying to find it but could not. My mom told my dad this time, and an exterminator came up but couldn't find anything either. The noise persisted. Then I heard noises coming from the foray in the bathtub. It sounded like someone was trying to force the foray out of its place. I told my dad again, thinking there was a problem with the pipes. He found nothing. The footsteps and the wall noises are continuous but seem to get louder at night. I don't know if it's just because the house is quiet at night or if it sounds louder or what. I should mention that our attic is very short and hot. It's not possible for a grown person to stand upright, so no, we don't have someone living there. And my dad checked around and found nothing. Then it began messing with our dogs. The things scared the hell out of our oldest dog, Amber, twice. None of the other dogs did this, just her, and she did it twice. No knocking on the door that she was lying in front of, which even if it was there she wouldn't be afraid of. She just started barking her head off. The last thing it does to our dogs is the hardest to talk about. Bouncy is a beagle mix and quite large. The first time was the night before my first day of school. I can't remember which year it was, but it was in at least the last 4 years. I remember I had a coconut hair mask on and I had just gotten out of the shower, so I wasn't dressed yet, just in a towel, and all of a sudden I hear snarling and barking and my mom screaming her head off. I go in there and we have to physically pry them off each other. Little Bit was injured but not bad enough to go to the vet, so we just separated them and they eventually got over it, but they still ended up fighting several more times. I've got Ninja trying to stop them, although I know they didn't mean to hurt me. I remember one time my dad just straight picked up Little Bit and Bounce was attached to her throat and was also in the air. Eventually they stopped until a few months ago it was 3 a.m. I remember very vividly because I was trying to sleep but was on the phone and my mom called me out of my room. What could you possibly want? I thought it's 3 a.m. Her yell was urgent though, so I didn't even bother putting on my shorts. I just ran to the kitchen. She screamed that they were fighting again and needed help. I ran out there with a flashlight, not even bothering to put shoes or pants on, and I had to pry them apart by myself because my mom didn't even move from the back porch. At one point I even hit Bounce in the back with a flashlight because she just wouldn't stop and I couldn't separate them. I was screaming for my mom and I'm surprised I didn't awake the neighbors with how much noise was happening. It's terrifying seeing two animals you love dearly trying to kill each other. I eventually got them apart and held a little bit back. Oh, by the way, earlier the other day Bouncy had come inside with blood on her, but we didn't know from what. My mom just called Bounce up to the porch and let her in, and Little Bit was standing. When I tell you that I've never seen her look like that, it looked like she'd reverted to, I don't know, primal instinct. It's like her personality and sweetness just drained from her, and I was reminded that day that she was an animal. My mom woke up my dad and he had the audacity to be inconvenienced. I don't have the best parents, but that's another story. My mom decided that this was the last SW and one of them needed to go. So we ended up taking Little Bit to the SPCA, but don't worry, we know she was adopted and is fine now. This is just the prelude. The first experience I remember was actually with a friend. I was in middle school, so around 4 to 7 I would go with my friend, this girl Kay. She lived down the street and would often come over to my house after school and would sometimes stay for dinner before walking back home. That day was one of them. We had been in my bedroom that I shared with my older sister Tori. Not sure where she was, but she wasn't in the room. My grandparents had this bench filled with toys that they needed to get rid of because we were older and no longer used it, so we were allowed to pick up some stuff and brought those things along with the bench home. One of the things I picked out was a Scooby-Doo stuffed animal. Apparently it was called the Fright Night Scooby stuffed animal. A flashlight was attached to his hand, and whenever you turned it on there would be a ghost shadow on the light, and he would say something like, "Cover my eyes, too scary," in his iconic Scooby voice. At the time it was turned off in no batteries and was purely decorative. It had been sitting on the floor in front of my sister's bed, which is on the other side of the room on the door. Me and Kay were called for dinner, so I let her walk out of the room before turning off the lights, and I kid you not, this thing goes turn the lights back on. Too scary. At the exact same time me and Kay run out the room. I didn't even shut the door and was screaming about how it just spoke. My parents don't believe me, of course, so we ate. Kay went home and I ripped the wires out of that thing and threw it away. My sister moved out when I was 11. I'm 19 now and have our room to myself. It's a strange shape. It's a box, but they didn't finish one war, so there's a little bump out area. For the longest time my bed was in that little nook. We had bunk beds that were in the nook. Then we had custom beds built by my dad that were like loft beds, and mine was in the corner. Now I have a proper bed that's too big for it, so I have a desk there with my makeup. The bedroom door is next to where the wall of that desk is on. That makes sense. The door is across from the desk through my closet, and one day I was sitting there doing my makeup when from the corner of my eye I see a dark figure. I immediately jump thinking it's my mom who had snuck into my room without me noticing, but my door is squeaky, so there's no way I wouldn't have heard. I slowly turn around and then lean around the corner. The door is closed. No one else was in the room. I'm looking around startled at what the hell I just saw. As I'm scanning the room I see a black hand come from the wall on the floor directly in front of the door. It had a piece of paper on the floor, so I figured it just blew up and saw the shadow. So I returned to do my makeup. I take some pictures, take it off, and sit back down on my bed, which is across from my desk in the corner of the room. Then I noticed the paper moved in time, but it didn't explain what I saw standing in the middle of the room. Now for the latest thing, I have a weird sleeping schedule as I'm unemployed and not going to school. Yesterday I woke up At 2 a.m. my dad left for work at 4 a.m. as always, and my mom went to bed around 3 a.m. so I had the house to myself. I woke up, had some leftovers, got something out of the cabinet, but left it open because I knew I had to put the thing back, so what's the point? Everything is squeaky, even the cabinets, and I'm standing at the microwave, ironically right next to the coffee machine, and turn around to put it back and the cabinet is now shut. Now I know I have a bad memory, but I never close them. I don't unless they're low to the ground, where my cats can get in, so how did it close? And I would have heard it if I'd have closed it while I'm eating. My mom screams for me and sounds absolutely terrified. I thought she got mad at me because I accidentally woke her up, so I yelled back what she says. She heard a noise in her room, so I just left my room, and my mom said something in the bathroom scared our young cat Ivy, and she came running out of the bathroom, so that's great. I hate the bathroom. Stuff always happens there. She yells at me. She doesn't respond, so I open my door and see my mom sitting up in her bed sobbing. She says she heard a female voice and it sounded like it was at the foot of her bed. I assumed someone broke into our house. I go into her room, shut the door, leaving it a crack open, grab her phone and ask if we should call the police. She says no, so I check the house. I knew I had let the dogs out earlier, but I was certain I locked the doors after letting them back. And I turned on the flashlight on her phone and walked around checking the front and back door, and they were both locked. I didn't bother checking the window because our house is pretty impossible to break into, so I knew no one else was in our house. She's still sobbing when I get back to her room. She says that it was feminine but didn't sound like words, just mumbling 2 syllables. All of my family members have 2-syllable word names, so it might have been a name. I asked her about sleep paralysis and she said that she could move and the voice sounded clear. I told her about the cabinet because I remember it happened literally less than an hour before. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't go back to bed until my dad got home in 2 p.m. Bounce and Zoe were laying on the floor in front of the bed and didn't react to anything at all. Amber was laying next to my mom and was asleep when I was talking to her. Katniss and Ivy were laying on the couch in the living room and none of them reacted either. I don't know if she saw anything, but there have been some things there. But my mom is pretty blind without her glasses. She has bifocals and it was dark, but this is really starting to freak me out. Cats just sit and stare at the corner of the living room that just happens to connect to my mom's room. I thought for the longest time it was the old man next door. The shadow person that I saw didn't feel feminine, but it didn't also feel threatening. I've woken up with bruises in random spots, and while I do move around a lot, my mom would hear it if I hit a wall, and I have no clue what to do this along with a lot of the stuff that happened with my friend in the forest that's around our neighborhood is really getting to me. I don't even wholly believe in this, but what else could it be? How do you imagine the sound? We're not even close to being religious, and I'm not really looking for tips. I just needed to share this with someone who had believed me when I told my parents about the shadow person. They straight up laughed. I can't even imagine what my dad will say to my mom, and I saw her crying. She looked so scared. She called me because she thought someone might be in our house. Like, that's how sure she is. She heard it. I'm honestly so sick of this house. I just want to leave it and this town behind. My first experience was working in a haunted hotel. I was taking pictures on the 12th floor attic area when I got the sensation that I should not be doing that. As I walked down the stairs, a little voice in the back of my head told me to be careful. Later that day I was pulling a big laundry cart through a doorway when somehow my little finger got caught between it and the door frame. I had to wear a splint for a few weeks. I apologized to whatever it was and took care not to record videos or pictures. The second time was a little more my fault, and I paid for it. I was feeling like something was messing with me, and I told it to not be a little prick. I kept getting things thrown or knocked over my table as I was working that day, and I realized what I had said and apologized. The third time wasn't intentional on my part. One was having a rough day because the previous shift dropped the ball on the job. I made a comment to myself about whatever was there messing with them. It didn't take it too kindly that I insulted it. I went down to the break room to check something on the computer, and as I was going to sit down, it felt like the chair was just rolled out from under me, just enough for me to slip and fall on my ass. I was okay, quickly righted myself, and muttered that I wasn't being serious, but apologized. Again, try and take heed from my stories when you're in it. Paranormal location or something similar. Be respectful and open-minded to what may be watching you that you can't see. About 12 years ago, in a suburb of Baton Rouge, there was a suspected serial killer on the loose. The running joke in our store was that it was one of us because the murders were happening in and around our delivery area. There was a seedy motel by a remote industrial complex right off the highway. Everyone hated having to deliver there because it was mostly shady characters or trucked vendors, and none of them ever tipped. I got stuck going there at around 11 p.m. on a Friday night. As I approached the room, I could see the door was slightly open. I knocked and said hello, and there was no answer. Through the crack I could see a person sitting, so I nudged the door open a little. It was a frumpy, middle-aged, naked woman tied to a chair, blindfolded and gagged. She nods as if to acknowledge my presence and turned her head in the direction of the nightstand. There was a note and some money on it. I scanned the room and didn't see any sign of anyone else, i.e. the person who tied her up. I read the note, and it was something to the effect of, "This is our 20th anniversary, and this was my fantasy. Please look all you want, but don't touch, and keep the change. P.S. My husband is hiding and watching, so don't try anything." There was a $20 tip. I thought for sure this was my last delivery I'd ever be making. I snatched the money and left the pizzas on the bed and backed out slowly. I have never been more creeped out in my life. Fortunately, there was no murder for me at that hotel that night. It happened back in 2008. I was a junior in high school, hanging out with an old girlfriend of mine and her friend at my house while the rest of my family flew out to Washington to visit family the previous night. The night was any typical teenager hangout. We ordered pizza. H. Hart played Guitar Hero and played some homemade spirit games, things with fire. You light the fire and ask the ghost a question. If the fire moves, it means whatever. Anyway, profoundly normal things. For reference, we were all hanging out in the attic, which at the time was my bedroom. The staircase LED right under the living room, which has a bead door at the bottom. You can usually hear someone coming through them to get up, but this shook all of us to our call. We were well and playing ghost games and playing Guitar Hero when out of nowhere during a break a blood-curdling scream from a woman shrieked from the bottom of the stairs. It almost sounded fake, like a corny movie scream, but loud and panicked. For sure we froze and heard nothing else. No beads, no footsteps, nothing. My house was old, so you often heard and felt people moving around in it, but there was nothing. I got the courage to charge the living room with a pocket knife after yelling that we were calling the cops, but to our surprise there was nothing. The doors and windows were locked. It was the middle of a particularly nasty Michigan snowstorm, so there weren't even footprints outside the house. We all ran outside and went to the end of the short driveway, looking in the window from far. For an intruder, we called the police, and they came and searched the entire house for us while we sat in my 90s Pontiac Grand Prix. After an hour, they came back and found no one. After this, I ran into the house, grabbed my essentials, and drove to my best friend's house, and ended up crashing at his place for 3 months. After that, I refused to sleep in the house until my family had returned from Washington. To this day, I have no clue what it was, but it sends shivers down my spine thinking about that scream. Even as an adult, nothing else ever happened at the house, and nothing really happened before either. It was random as hell. This happened when I was in high school. It was summer vacation, and 4 of my male friends and 1 female decided we should go check out a haunted abandoned villa. It was in the middle of the woods. We didn't want to get caught going in there, so we went when it was dark, just past 11 p.m. We were fearless back in those days. None of us knew the first thing about hauntings or ghosts. We just stood outside trying to figure out how to go about it. I suggested we split up into 2 small teams, but the others were too nervous to be separated. The villa had 3 floors, and one appeared to be underground. We decided to start from the top and work our way down to the basement. We assembled a line. I brought the biggest flashlight out of the group, so I was voted to be up front. We went in the villa. I cannot say the atmosphere was odd or that it was especially spooky in there, but what freaked me out was the fact that we were constantly moving further and further from the exit. A feeling of anxiety, like there was no escape, overcame us. We went down the corridor from the lobby, and my friends were whipping doors open and shining flashlights in the room. We didn't see anything of interest, and nothing scary happened. Some of the rooms were locked. Don't know why though. It was creepy imagining what might be on the other side. We had no idea how long the villa had been abandoned. The building was pretty sound except from the odd squeaky floorboard and broken windows. Some debris in the corridor too. When you're in an abandoned house in the woods, all the sounds you make sound very loud. The crunch of broken glass etc. was magnified. I was worried about us getting spotted or caught. As we began to ascend to the second floor, the girl in our group paused and said something. Is this blood? She found some sort of dark mark on the wall. Just as she said that, my torch light fell on a small round ball on the ground. There were lots of them. I realized there were BB or air gun pellets. It was freaking us out a bit. Our friend was sure that she was looking at blood, so she stepped back and bumped into something. Something dropped from the ceiling, narrowly missing her. The sound of a metallic object impacting on the ground ran through the villa. We thought that there was some kind of booby trap. Who would set it up, and why? What goes on here? We asked each other. She was so freaked out by what happened she didn't want to go any further. Her boyfriend who was with us took her back to the car, which just left the 3 of us. We wanted to make our way to the basement. Somehow knowing that people have been in here made us feel a little more confident. While we were on the basement floor, we made sure to check all the rooms. These were different rooms, weird windowless rooms where the walls were all painted black. We didn't like the vibe down there at all. I could tell the others wanted to get back upstairs as much as I did, but we'd come this far. We had to see everything we approached. One door at the end of the corridor, there was a sign on the door that read boiler room. Beneath the sign there were some words scratched which chilled me to the bone. Don't open the door, the children will get out. We ran for it, but before we did, I swear I heard something move behind the door. Even if it was a prank by the people who hang out there, even if it was nothing at all in that moment, something deep down inside me told me to get the hell out of that place. I'm sure it was a prank. I mean, it had to be right. As a child, I had spent weekends at my dad's house, which was old and said to be haunted by a playful girl called Esther. For other people, doors would shut themselves, lights would turn on and off, and doorbells would ring in the middle of the night. My siblings would even have conversations with Esther. Understanding this as a 6-year-old absolutely terrified me. Pretty soon I had my own experiences, but they were less friendly. I'd hear breathing in the dark. I'd stop breathing to listen, and it was closer to me than my stepbrother in the bunk above. I'd wake up to see the imprint of someone sitting on my bed reading. Other stories of sleep paralysis sounds familiar to mine, but one night I challenged my night error. I had 2 die-cast race cars on my dresser, both hoods opened of the car, but one didn't stay up very well. I said out loud, if you're here, shut the hood when I go to bed, and open the hood of the car that had the better functioning hood. I stared at it to make sure that it was up, and stayed up. I hit the lights, and as soon as I did so, I heard slam. I turned the lights on, and the hood was closed. I ran downstairs, and my stepmother said I looked as white as a sheet, like I'd seen a ghost. She and my dad checked it out, and came to the conclusion that it must have just shut by itself. The weirdness continued until the day we moved out, but I still have trouble believing it myself, or typing it out for that matter, and still get chills just remembering it. This happened when I was 8 years old. I woke up one night to go to the bathroom when I heard my mother argue in her bedroom. It's worth noting that my mother was quite unwell, and we knew that eventually the sickness would claim her. However, at no point did it affect her mind. She was arguing in her bedroom, and it caught my attention because she sounded rather upset. "No, I don't want to go," she kept on saying in an angry tone. I tiptoed in to see who she was talking to, but when I observed there was no one there, she was talking to the wall. Eventually, just being a child and a bit tired, I returned to bed, and the next morning I spoke to her normally. Like I said, her mind was unaffected by the illness, and then I gave her a kiss goodbye for the day. A few hours later she had passed on. I still remember the look in her eyes when she waved at me through the doorway, which she never did normally. She knew that she would never see me again. I deliver for a restaurant in town, Angelo's Pizza. It's the name, and some of the best pizza in town. They have the nights aren't always busy, and I have a few minutes to kill here and there between deliveries, so I bring laptop to work. I do music writing and occasionally play chess to fill in the gaps. It was a Saturday night, and surprisingly it wasn't too busy. At around 11 p.m. a delivery is ready. My boss hands me the food, and I walk out the back door to my car. A short 7-minute drive is fueled by the delicious aroma of fried mushrooms, Canadian bacon pizza, and the screams of my music, which gives me a short adrenaline rush and hypes me to the last stop of the night. I arrive at the address. It's the Heritage Inn, the only hotel in our town of about 9,000. The place is located on the edge of town and is a casual style 2-floor hotel with a not so vibrant all appeal. The building is made up of regular drab brick spaced with normal boring windows every few feet, and the roof is shingled with a dark brown. At night it looks even duller, and tonight the parking lot is next to empty but is filled with a few half-dimmed light posts, giving it an unnerving feeling. The feeling that makes me want to strategically place my car keys between my fingers just in case I put up to the entrance, which has the most appealing feature to the outside of the building, a 9T overhang. I enter the hotel through a single door and then into the concierge's room. I go up to the girl to let her know I'm heading up, and I struggle to read the smudge writing room 101. I tell her to the right of the desk is a door leading to the most eye-catching feature of the entire hotel, the pool. It looks magnificent at night when it's vacant and calm, with the dim light reflecting off the water on the beige walls. It's almost a surreal and eerie environment, and yet it seems so inviting. I go down the hallway past the out-of-date vending machines and past the dark and noisy laundry room. The hall is long and not very brightly lit like everything else, it seemed. Fortunately, the door to the stairs is soon after the laundry room, directly to the right. As I'm walking up the stairway, I can't help but think about the story I heard of this very same hotel. Whether it was factual or just a story, it still gives me a bone-chilling feeling. A murder took place here. One of the maids went on her daily walkthrough to which room I don't know, and found the sheets of both beds soaked in blood. The police were informed, but no one was found in the room, nor were any bodies discovered in the hotel. There was more to the story, but I couldn't remember anything, probably due to me terrified of the nature and the atmosphere that the hotel had to offer this night. Either way, all that kept passing through my mind were IMA of a corpse rotting away under some bed or under the floor. I near the top of the stairs, and I see the room number 101 through the glass window. A feeling of relief passes over me, knowing I won't have to go down the next darkened hallway. I open the door into the hallway and stand in front of the room. I look around me at both ends of the hall to reassure myself I'm not alone. I knock on the door and I wait a few seconds as I carefully balance the pizza and bag with one arm and the order ticket in the other hand. I hear a mumbled voice Approach the door. As the door slowly creaks open, a man appears. An instant flashback to Jurassic Park races in my head, as the man bore a striking similarity to John Hammond, both age and appearance being around the age of 60, with white hair and a beard and a round face with glasses. The man is on the phone and opens the door all the way. He makes a waving gesture informing me to come inside. As I get a good view of the entire room and I'm just about to take a step into the room, I notice something that is in no way in the realm of a normal hotel room, and I abruptly hate my stride. 3 people in total. I see the first is the John Hammond doppelganger at the door, who is now seemingly pretending to talk on the phone as he hides his head behind the door. The second is a woman who could possibly be a wife or girlfriend of the old man. She looks like she's in her 50s. She is sitting on a chair directly across the room from the door, looking up, watching TV in the corner. The third is a girl who I am 100% sure is within 13 to 15 years of age, lying on her stomach top of the bed. This is the part that unsettled me. Aside from underwear, as in panties, she's not wearing any clothes, and as a total stranger is at a wide open door. She makes no effort to conceal herself or even acknowledge my presence. She didn't seem to realize or care that she was half naked, almost like she was drugged. Then I noticed the woman on the chair as she periodically looks over towards me, totally aware of the situation. Then I noticed the man at the door, who at least 2 minutes after I arrived is still looking through his wallet behind the door. Also, I assume that's what he's doing. I got the feeling like he was stalling. He hangs up the phone and apologizes to me for the wait with a raspy, very creepy voice. I tell him the price and we exchange the food for the money. Between the exchange, I noticed the girl on the bed turned to face me for a second. It's at this brief moment I was able to stare into her eyes. They seemed vacant and void of any emotion, like they had been stolen from her, like she was lost. She turned back to the TV without a single change in her face. The notices I look at the girl, then turns and looks at her and back at me. He stares at me for a few seconds and asks me, "You sure you don't want to come in?" He said it with such a large but noticeably fake smile. I'm scared. It scared me and plunged me deep into a feeling of dread as my heart dropped. It was one of those moments where you know without a doubt that something is not right. Right would be an understatement. Actually, this felt like an eternity of darkness overcame me, like some evil entity was piercing my soul. We made our exchange. Nothing more was needed. What did this guy want? I firmly declined his offer. As I shook my head from side to side, he stared at me with that smile for a few more long seconds. The woman was still on the chair looking at me, and the girl was not moving on the bed. He stood still, smiling. "All right, then you have a good night," and closed the door. I stood outside the door for a minute, thinking I was in momentary shock. I put the money in my pouch and headed back down the stairs. I informed the girl at the front desk about the situation, but I don't think she took it as seriously as I did. Maybe I didn't explain it as well for her. I exited the hotel, got into my car, and began driving back through town. No music now. I needed a quiet moment and decided for whatever reason to call my mom and explain the situation. I explained the delivery from hell to her, and she told me to hang up and call the police. I did so, but got no answer. I called my mom back and said I couldn't get through. She tried calling and I waited. It's been 2 days since that delivery. I apparently had a message on my phone but didn't receive it due to phone trouble from the police who were returning my call. They were interested in hearing my story and seemed pretty concerned. All the probable scenarios, both within the realm of reality and exaggeration, that could have happened that night have been swirling through my thoughts. Did I make a choice that would have possibly saved my own life, and could I have indirectly witnessed the beginnings to something terrible? 4 years later now, I always think about what could have happened to that girl. What if she was found dead 50 mil away and I never knew about it? Could I have done more to help? Did she even need help? or was that whole night just one sick misunderstanding? I wonder what would have happened to me if I'd have got into that room I hate. Visions of needles, knives, or blood and cameras running through my mind. Just what on earth were those people doing? A priest once told me he went to a house because it was infested. As soon as he entered, he was greeted by the owner of the apartment, who immediately started to tell him about the presence. She said it was a child spirit who would sometimes either scare her or, when she was asleep, hug her legs. As a confirm, shortly after she had ended her narration, they heard the door moving. There was no one inside the apartment, but then the priest called his superiors, and they came over in an attempt to banish whatever was there, trying to use holy water on the bedroom wall, and allegedly the pictures hung on the wall moved as they did so in order to avoid contact with the liquid. When everything was finished, the priest went on to investigate the situation, and allegedly after some time discovered that a satanic rite was made in this area before the construction of the building. Back when I lived in Maryland a few years ago, I attended a day program facility for outpatient treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder and major depressive disorder. I often liked to walk up to the place early as well as before the other clients arrived. Me and a friend of mine had full access to as many cups of coffee as we could hold down. After the morning, janitor Dave let us in. I arrived at my usual time, a little under 2 a.m. I only had 3 more hours to go until Dave pulled in for work, and decided to binge some YouTube, all on my old Windows phone that I currently had at the time. About an hour or so into listening to Devin the Dude, a pair of tinted blue headlights approached slowly up the driveway into the parking lot. I thought it was Dave at first from afar, until the car soon pulled itself much further into view to reveal the logo of the Howard County Police. Instantly I'm thinking, what the hell? I'm pretty sure I'm not doing anything wrong by just standing here. As a client, the officer exits his car along with another, in that of another female, who pulls up in another cruiser behind. Then immediately they begin asking me for all my credentials, and I'm confused as hell. I asked them what's going on. They briefly explained to me that a 911 hang-up call was made in the area, and somehow that call in particular was made from my phone. I'm beyond baffled at this point, and explained to them that there was no way that that was near possible, as my finger never once touched the call icon, let alone left the internet browser. With a bit of confusion of their own I could sense on both their faces and demeanor, they eventually bid me a good rest of the morning and left in their cars and back down the driveway. This still shakes me to this day of just how someone had gotten into my phone to call 911 while I was still using it, and why, if anyone can help me unravel this mystery of mine, I would certainly appreciate it. My very first car was a dark green 2000s Volkswagen Jetta. It was the most basics when it came to cars. No options whatsoever except for an automatic transmission. It was $300, slow, dumpy, no right headlight, drove straight with the steering wheel practically sideways, and let out a cloud of white smoke when it started. Every stereotype of a poor high schooler's car you can think of, and my car was no exception, despite it being a piece of crap. I loved that car. I drove it every chance I had, and I don't think a day went by I didn't drive it. I named it Thunder Buddy. She was my baby, my beautiful green baby. But Volkswagens from that generation, Jetta especially, had a pretty bad floor in the automatic transmission. I'm not sure exactly what caused it, but essentially the transformations gradually get worse and worse until the car will not shift into third gear, and there's not a thing you can do from there. So a couple of weeks after Halloween 2019, I was going Around 30 miles per hour when the engine suddenly roared and the car wouldn't speed up. I feared the worst, and my fears were justified. My dad, a mechanic, didn't even have a hope for my baby. She was gone already, and so much to my dismay, I started looking for a new car. It only took about a month for us to find her, a dark green 1999 Volkswagen Jetta, exactly like my old car, but with all the trimmings she was faster, had heated leather seats, auto windows, auto sunroof, everything, all except automatic transmission. I knew how to drive manual, so it was perfect. I had a new baby. From the crackhead neighborhood girl to Scarlett Johansson, at least in my eyes. I loved the car even harder, named it Little Boy, and was happy. Okay, now for the story, but I need a few things to explain first in order to really gather the context. Firstly, when you have a manual car, you cannot leave it in gear and take your foot off the clutch. If you do, it will stall, which is bad. So if you do leave your car in gear, you need to turn the engine off before taking your foot off the clutch. If you don't want to turn the car off or have it turn itself off, you need to pull the handbrake on or it will roll away. Take a guess what was the only real broken thing on my car, and this is the point the story takes place. I started working as a pizza delivery driver in a smaller growing town in Michigan. It was good money, but every once in a while I delivered to an incredibly sketchy place, and I've had a few shotguns pulled on me. One night about 2 months ago, I was delivering on a Friday. Usually Fridays are very busy, but this day was a little slow, so when delivery came at 8:30 a.m., half an hour before we closed, I jumped on it. I realized I was 7.1 m away, so all of the close jobs would be done by the time I got back, and I would have been able to leave immediately. It was way out of town in a wood-surrounded neighborhood, but again, no work when I got back to the store, so it seemed like a good deal to me, and I'm all about those sorts of deals, and so I climbed into my car and went to drive the 7.1 miles. As I pulled up to the house, I began to get a bad feeling. The house was in a small trailer park type neighborhood next to a lake, the kind that the houses are all a good distance apart, likely with a drug problem, and it was completely dark, no lights on anywhere, and there was a single car in the driveway and an open window on the side of the house. I pulled in behind the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment. Something was off by the house being completely dark. I mean, there wasn't so much as a night light that I could see. Usually when I delivered to a dark house, there's at least a light on upstairs or something that would signal someone being awake and waiting for their pizza, but the household seemed dead. Nevertheless, I put the car in gear, turned off the engine, and grabbed the small, cheapest pizza we had and got out without my headlights on. There was nothing. I could barely see the house. The only light was from the dim moon. I walked onto the porch and past the big open window to the front door. As I reached the front door, I saw the door was slightly cracked open and just enough for me to see into the void of the house. Thinking of every single horror movie I'd ever seen, I said aloud, "Screw this," and hurry back to my car. I'm a well-built looking guy, but despite my wide shoulders and baggy hoodie, I'm frail and can hardly fight off a small dog. I got into my car and turned on the engine. My headlights illuminated the house, and almost simultaneously the living room lights behind the big door open window lit up. A single guy looked out and walked to the front door. I cussed myself and weighed my options. If I went to the door, I could die. If I noted out of there, I could 110% be fired. That meant no new car part, no gas money, no cute dates with my girl, just sitting there at home doing virtual schoolwork. It was a stupid choice, I know, but I grabbed the pizza and opened my door, making a choice I damn glad I made. I took the car out of gear and climbed out, mostly so my engine would still be running, so that if I needed I could run back and immediately take off. I walked To the door there was the man. He had opened it the rest of the way. As I got closer, I got a good look at him. I'm not to judge a person based on their physical appearance, but this guy's head was clean shaven and covered in tattoos. He was wearing a pair of gray jeans and a white tank top. He had a scowl on his face and was staring at me dead in the eyes. I looked past him for a moment into the house, which was completely empty. As I got close enough that I started opening the pizza bag, he began reaching around his waist. I stopped. He was staring at me with the most evil grin I'd ever seen. I knew in that moment that I was about to die. I had always heard your life seems to flash before your eyes, and I thought about my girl, that she wouldn't know what happened. My work would stop delivering upon my disappearance, assuming that my body was never found. My dad would regret telling me he was happy for me for landing this job. God save thee. That's when I heard it, the distinct sound of gravel under tires. My only pathetically small chance escape was rolling away, and I didn't even look back at the car to know that. Remember, the part of my car that was damaged was the handbrake. I stared at the man and was about to say screw you when he looked back to my car. Then I heard the sound of the car rolling. It was getting closer. The guy's eyes went from the driveway to behind me. I finally looked over my shoulder. My car had rolled backwards and had come to a smooth stop near the mailbox of the house. I looked back at the guy, who had a nervous look. He looked back at me and scowled again and took his hand from around his waist. He reached into his front pocket and took out $12 and handed it to me. I gave him the pizza and watched him slam the door shut. I ran back to my car, practically tore the door open trying to get in. I looked back at the house, and the man was standing in the front window staring at me. You better believe I nearly spun those tires all the way to get out of there. I kept glancing at my mirrors and I started driving under some street lights. It was easily the scariest moment I've ever had. As soon as I got back to my store, I told my boss about it, and she called the police. We never heard anything about it. I assumed they went to the house and only found a small cheese pizza, and I started carrying a knife on me at all times, and my boss is considering getting trackers for our pizza bags. Only recently did I realize this is a sort of butterfly effect. I thought it was the worst thing ever that my transmission went out. I cursed Volkswagen for designing such a terrible automatic transition, but if that transmission still worked, then I would have still had that car when this happened, and I would have put the car in park, and it would have sat there while whatever would happen to me happened. I have zero doubt in my mind that that man was planning on murdering me. So crappy German engineering saved my life from being murdered. Not too long ago, I went for a drive with some of my friends. We were driving around until late. It was pretty foggy that night. It was pretty foggy out too. It tends to be foggy in the mountains, and that's where we were. We wanted to go to the observatory area near the top of the mountain. I can't remember why we wanted to go. I realized that a Jeep had started following us. It was coming up behind us really fast. One of my friends in the back pointed this out and requested in some colorful language for me to speed up. I, of course, was only happy to oblige. It was a Mercedes-Benz G-Class, which is one that basically looks like a Jeep. This thing was way more suited to the mountain roads than our little car. It was really stressful with that behind me and closing the gap with every second, plus the fog, plus my friends freaking out in the back. Luckily, I spotted the term for the observatory. I would soon be out the road for that thing to pass. If that was indeed why it was tailing me, I turned in hoping the Benz would keep going straight, but it didn't. I pulled in and blocked the exit. I knew that whatever was going to come next wasn't going to be good. I sat in the driver's seat with sweat running down my forehead, telling my friends to keep calm and doors. Agonizing seconds turned into minutes, then a couple of figures emerged from the bends. We sat there marrying to one another, pretending to be less frightened than we were. Finally, the two men approached us. They were wearing crisp and clean suits and looked really professional. A slender man who wore glasses rapped on the driver's side window, and I lowered it about 10 centimeters. "What are you doing out here this time of night?" "We're just thinking of checking out the night view here," his friend who looked in really great shape snorted at. "This bunch of guys coming out here at this hour to look at the view on a foggy night? Huh, these guys looked like they were part of the Yakuza. You know why we followed you, right?" I shook my head. "Come on, you guys driving around here ain't up to no good, no doubt. We thought you might be one of us. Don't worry, you boys are right. This is just a misunderstanding." There was a collective sigh of relief resonating in the car. We were at ease. We actually had a few cans of coffee from the vending machine together and had a chat and a smoke. We knew these guys 100% were you are at this point. After a while, the guy with glasses said we better get going. We got something we got to do. They were perfectly nice guys. They got back into their car and I expected them to pull away, but they didn't. Their car just stayed blocking the exit. We were starting to get nervous again, but then after about 3 or 4 minutes their engine started up and they disappeared from sight, going up the road into the mountains rather than back the way we came. I don't know if they were doing anything in the mountains, but that's not my business. There wasn't anything going on, and I was just glad to be leaving now that we were pretty sure we weren't about to have any conflict with the Yakuza. We began to laugh about the situation and tell one another how scared we were. Well, nearly all of us were laughing. One of my friends remained quiet, and his face was pale. It was as if he'd seen a ghost. I noticed this and asked him directly if he was okay. His reply shocked me. "I saw something." I pressed him to go on. The car was silent. When the big guy opened the back seat door, I got a glimpse of inside the Jeep. There was a guy with tape over his mouth and his arms behind his back. They were up to something. I know for a fact it's nothing but empty forest land up in those mountains. None of us wanted to say what we thought was going to happen to that man, but I guess we were all thinking the same thing. I called the police, but without a license plate I couldn't give them much to go on. I really don't know why my friend didn't memorize it. If he saw the man in distress in the back seat, be careful on mountain roads late at night. Guys, I want to share with you today a story I call The Door to Hell. It happened in Portland, Oregon, 1994, but the story goes back way further than that. In the area of southeast Portland, just a hair south of Flave Street and 52nd, there stood an old historic mansion. It had that semi-Addams Family vibe to it, and it was haunted as hell. Anyway, let me break you down some of the past. It was commissioned by a Union U.S. Civil War veteran. He had it built so his wife, son, and daughters could move in. He became the most prominent dog breeder in the area, and his wife made and sold dolls. Sometime along the way, the old soldier suffered a significant breakdown. He began to abuse and torment his wife and children, but the son got the worst of it. He would beat the boy senseless with his cane and then lock him in the door to the hell cubby hole. In the end, the butcher killed his wife, daughters, and then himself. His son had been locked inside that cubby hole and eventually died to his injuries or starvation. Concerned businessmen were worried when the soldier hadn't come to some meetings of the local Chamber of Commerce, so they sent out some people to investigate. When they found a horror show from 1875 until 1974, the house jumped from owner to owner. All saw the customized large Dutch colonial mansion and wanted it for any number of reasons. All would at some point endure similar supernatural events there, and in 1974 the final owners turned the house over to the local historic society in 1994. My friend Nick's family bought it from the Historical Society for quite a steal when my friends first moved, and we would hear the sounds of dogs barking, yipping, and whining in the basement. However, they didn't own a dog. Lights would constantly turn on behind you or off when you walked into a room. Forets would turn on by themselves, and random objects in locked rooms wouldn't be there where they were left. On many occasions, my friends, family, and I would swear we would hear the grandfather clock chime 13 times at 6:30. In the morning, many of us felt what could be described as a gentle touch, like a family member placing their hand or shoulders. It had weight and pressure, and we would turn to find no one there. This was made even worse when one of us had our back to the wall. There was one occasion when my friend, his older brother, and I witnessed what we would later believe to be the ghost of the original owner. This happened when we saw a man ascend the staircase beside me as I went downstairs to use the bathroom. But there were no elderly men in this house, which leaves one to speculate who it could have been. There were also several times when driving up the long driveway, a dark figure would be observing, watching people driving up the house in the third-story window on the north side. Almost every time this happened, no one was home. The eldest daughter complained constantly. She'd at random times in her room hear the sound of someone behind her sniffing her hair. She would turn but be alone in the room. Furthermore, she constantly had her door locked due to her brothers constantly bugging her. Twice while watching movies in the living room, we all heard the loud and heavy noise of something moving across the wooden floor of the second floor. Somehow a near 200-pound wooden bed and frame had moved almost 9 feet across the room without disturbing the contents of the bed. In my opinion, the second scariest thing happened one night while playing D&D in the living room. At one point, Clarissa, the second oldest daughter of my friend's family, got up to do a mild bit of body acting for a scene. She moved to the bay window and placed her hands on the little seat there. Her character was building up to some sort of loud outburst. She screams to the effect of, "Lord Carrington, I've had enough of you," without warning, when 3 very loud, very sharp bangs come from the window, as if someone was beating their fist on the other side. Seeing it was still light out, we could see there was no one there. This was followed by a voice screaming from the 3rd floor, "Keep it down, you rotten girl that made us all nope the hell out of there for the night." Finally, there was the door to hell incident in that 3rd-story suite. We discovered there was a hidden door in the wall. It was a hideaway closet. Behind that door was a second and smaller door. The moment we all discovered it, we were overcome with this utterly massive sensation of dread. We opened it. Inside was a smallish crawled space. The inner walls of the space were covered with claw-like marks, as if made with human fingernails. There were darker stains in the wood. When we washed it out to get a better look on the inside of door 2 were weakly carved words that read, "This is the door to hell." To this day, I and anyone there that day constantly have this door appear in our dreams. It appears randomly, like imagine you're walking into a classroom of your high school. You open the door in your dream, but instead of your classroom, it's that 3rd-story suite with a door to hell. Each time you see it, you're progressively closer than the last, and a feeling of predatory desire watches over you like you're the prey. After this, my friend's family decided it would be best to get a Catholic priest, as they were Catholic, to attempt to cleanse the house, but from what I remember, it wasn't successful, and the family wasn't in a financial position to move out for quite a while. They finally got a chance to move out, and shortly after, the house wound up being demolished. In the year 2000, the Historical Society had deemed the house to be too dangerous to preserve and too expensive. The repairs needed were excessively expensive, so they deemed it best to demolish it. The lot can be viewed on Google Maps today. From the supernatural and paranormal perspective, the daughter hell was studied a few times. The first was around 1927 when they reported more poltergeist-like activities, stating things did turn off and on doors slammed on their own, and stomping footsteps could be heard. In 1954, some students from OSU went to check it out for themselves, and they reported much of the same. The last and final inspection came around in 1997 when Nick's family asked a group of Portland-based ghost hunters to check it out. They reported some of the more severe events, which included the ghost touches and sense of abject dread from even looking towards the door. I'm glad it's no longer there and feel great sorrow for the family who suffered at the hands of that crazed man in that tainted location. When I was 8 years old, my mother and stepfather decided that they were going to move to northern Arkansas for them to have better job opportunities. It just so happened that they chose to buy a house that was about an acre away through open fields from a late 1800s to early 1900s cemetery. There was an old abandoned hand-built church that stood on the property that was no longer in use, and me and some of the neighborhood kids used to go and play in there. Nothing unusual had ever happened or given me the spooks until my 9th birthday. My mom made me invite all of the girls in my class at school to my sleepover party, and after we were done doing presents and everything, she told all of us to go outside and play. So the first thing I wanted to do was take all of my friends over to the church house to show them around. One of the girls that was sort of a loner anyway left the group and went weaseling through the actual cemetery, which was something that my mom had told me never to do. So the girl and I wound up getting into an argument, and she decided to go stomping on the graves and be disrespectful to the dead. I went and tattled, of course, so my mom made us come inside. As it was getting close to dark, we all got ready for bed, and we were getting settled down in my bedroom when all of a sudden the door slammed shut by itself, which freaked all of us out and made us scream. So my mom came barging through the door to see what happened and told us all to calm down, blamed it on the air conditioning, and said we needed to get laid down. After a few moments of her walking away, we all got nestled in but hadn't turned the lights off yet when the doors slammed shut by themselves again, and it started rattling and vibrating on its hinges. My mom came bursting through to see which one of us was causing the ruckus, but we all told her what happened again, and she still didn't believe us, so she shut off the light and left the door open. Mind you, I was deathly afraid of the dark, and since the other girls were there and couldn't sleep with a night light on, my mom wouldn't let me use mine. So when the door slammed shut a third time and the room was once again thrown into complete darkness, I went absolutely berserk with sobs and panic. At that point, my mom was getting downright pissed off because she thought that it was us. She opened the door, pulled me out of bed, told the girls that they had better get quiet before she had to start calling parents, and she made me go to sleep on the couch in the pitch darkness while I cried into my pillow where no one could hear me. I had gotten used to this since my mom always treated my night terrors with little to no empathy. The next thing I know, I feel something pour my covers down a little, so I get stiff as a board and peeped my head up just in time to see this black hairy looking fog thing slithering back down the couch towards another bigger black hairy looking fog thing that was connected to it, that was resting on top of the entertainment center. I was frozen in shock at this point. I couldn't make a sound until this thing had gotten halfway across the living room. I was almost to the couch. Then I finally let out a blood-curdling screech. My stepdad finally came in this time, and when he flipped on the lights, the fog thing vanished. I was hyperventilating, so he told me to come and get into bed with them. I finally calmed down, went to sleep, and everything was fine for the rest of the night. Fast forward to the next night, everyone had gone home, and it was back to the normal routine so that I could get ready for school the next day. When I lay down, I felt like something was watching me, so I insisted that my mom let me use my nightlight, but she wouldn't budge on the issue and finally agreed to leave the hallway light on with my door cracked. Instead, I did my little whimpering like usual until I was finally drifting off and saw this fog thing coming towards me again, but I was too tired to wake myself back up. The dream that I had that night was one of the scariest things I've ever dreamt of in my life, and it became a reoccurring dream for the next few months. I always woke up in a sweat and jolting myself from my bed to run to my parents' room one night, where the dream finally ended with me being ripped to shreds by these three little demon-looking things, which hadn't happened any of the other nights. I never had that dream again, but I also have only had a handful of dreams ever since. It's like my mind decided to shut itself off from the traumatic experiences the dreams were giving me, that or the entity decided to start hijacking my dreams from me. I'm not really sure. My belongings apport and reappear in the most random obvious places, specifically keys, not just mine but others as well. There were always weird noises in every house that I moved to. People that I live with have witnessed it. I've got pictures of it too. It throws things sometimes when it wants my attention, and it gets stronger the longer I live in one place. It's like if I move to a new house, it weakens the entity for a while, but it always manages to gain strength as it gets comfortable. It never really has done anything to harm me or anyone else per se, but it's always lurking, making its existence known, and gives everyone in my house the creeps. I've tried doing cleansing and prayers and all the spiritualistic stuff that most people advise, but those things don't even faze it in the slightest. What's even weirder is the fact that when I get very upset or angry, things fall off shelves or even fly towards me like Matilda, and I've even blown lights out just by touching the switch. When I'm in one of these moods, my hair constantly stays full of static, so much so that I literally have to use spray that you can iron your clothes with to keep my hair from sticking to my face, and orbs are starting to make themselves visible on a regular basis inside my home. Is it possible that something is manifesting by the suppression of my fears or something? The spiritual energy on my property is so intense I literally don't know how to explain it to people without sounding like I've lost all my marbles. I've done plenty of research over the years into possibilities, but have come up empty-handed every single time. Any information or insight would be appreciated more than you can understand. I'll start off by saying that high school was the beginning of the years of horrible bullying and mental and emotional abuse from people who were supposedly my friends. I was short, chubby, homely, and apparently very socially awkward. I had high hopes that going off to university and leaving those people behind would be the end of it, but I could not have been more wrong. My tormentors from high school were mean, but the people I lived with on my residence floor were downright hostile and cruel. Everything I was bullied about in high school were things they hated me even worse for. Needless to say, I was beaten down to a pulp, spineless, self-hating, and traumatized. The summer between first and second year ended up being life-changing. I dropped a bunch of weight, grew into my looks a bit more, and learned how to do makeup and dress nicely, and greatly improved my social skills. I went back the next year, an entirely different person. Suddenly I wasn't picked on anymore, and for the first time in my life boys were noticing me, and I was actually getting a little popular. Over the next 2 years I continued on this upward trend, and by the time summer hit before my final year, I was the happiest and most confident I had ever been. However, that did not erase the years of trauma and abuse that had so badly damaged my psyche. Despite finally being In a good place inside, I was still a beaten-down, spineless little girl who never stood up for herself and let people push her into doing things she didn't want to because she felt like she had to, and this is where our story begins. One night my friend Jana invited me out to a bar with her friend Glenn, a Saturday night. Why not? I hopped on a bus and told her I was on my way. When I got to the bar, Jana waved me over to her table where she was sitting with this massive hulky guy, not like a bodybuilder but kind of reminiscent of Hodder from Game of Thrones. Alice, this is Glenn. We exchanged our pleasantries and proceeded with no longer being sober. As the night wore on, it was pretty obvious that Glenn was interested in me. He kept smiling at me flirtatiously, giving me the look up and down, and he really liked that I was into things like video games, movies, and comic books. I guess he wasn't doing anything overtly aggressive or creepy, but something about him gave me a bad vibe that said I don't know about this guy, but I kept telling myself it was all in my imagination. A few days later, the three of us made plans to see the new Spider-Man movie that had just come out. As I was getting ready, I got a call from Glenn informing me that Jana had given him my address and that he would be going to come over to walk to our university campus where Jay has still lived. I got the bad vibe again, thinking I don't want him hanging out with me or walking with me, so I said, "Oh no, don't do that. It well, much easier to go separately and just meet at Jay's." "No, I'm walking you." "Okay." That was a tad alarming, but I knew he wouldn't relent and that we would be walking the 30 minutes to campus together whether I liked it or not. When the movie ended, Glenn invited us to hang out and drink at his place where we could stay the night. He lived a good way away from where Jana and I did, so staying the night did make sense. I felt uneasy but thought to myself, no, it'll be fine. Jana will be with me. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. For some insane reason he felt a good way to impress me was by showing me how much he could drink, because that's what everyone can look for in a partner, which was much less than he thought, and soon he was horrendously drunk. And that, my friends, is where it all hit the fan. He turned into a complete ogre, started punching out life light and tearing his clothes to shreds in a drunken rage before returning to the bathroom to vomit loudly. When he came out, Jana got up to use the bathroom next. I begged her not to go, or at least let me go in with her so I wouldn't be alone with him, but she said no and left me to fend for myself. That's when Glenn grabbed me and started making out with me, shoving his tongue down my throat. Did I mention he just puked his guts out and even had a little bit of vomit on his shirt? Still, I began pushing him away, which was difficult as he was much taller, stronger, and heavier than I. This of course angered him and he started breaking things again. That's when I got a text from Jana saying we should go. He's absolutely pathetic like this, and I immediately called for a cab. We informed Glenn that we were leaving and that incensed him even. "Well, I'm not going to let you leave." That's when we ran out the door to the street. Luckily, he didn't chase after us, and our cab got there soon. We were dropped off at Jana's residence building where we lamented the night as I pulled a sliver of broken light bulb from my foot. Now, a word about Jana. She, like me, has too suffered years of abuse and trauma that manifested itself in horrific tasted men whom she'd be completely subservient to. That I knew, but what she told me next shocked me even more. Her and Glenn were actually casually hooking up and had been for a while. He took her home that night after the bar, and as he was literally climbing into bed with her, he told her how much he wanted to have me and wanted her to help him. But remember what I said about the fact that he liked that I was into video games, movies, and comics? That also meant that I pinged on his gar and said to her that if she, as in me, doesn't sleep with him, and I was a lesbian now. That's some next level stuff right there. The next day I got a text from Glenn. It Little birdie told me you're not very happy with me. That bird is right, I replied. Yeah, I'm sorry I acted that way. Would you be interested in playing mini-golf sometime? I couldn't believe the nerve of him, a half apology over such horrific behavior that he was barely acknowledging, and then asking to hang out again. I knew that it was insanity, but beaten down, spineless little me still thought maybe I should give him a partial second chance, maybe. But if you think I will ever do anything remotely sexual with you, you're at your mind. What? Of course not. In fact, I'm offended you even thought those were my intentions. Yeah, no, I'm out. Unfortunately, he also knew the store that I worked at and came to my checkout aisle a few times, once to buy a replacement for the shirt he ripped apart, and would try to strike up a casual conversation with me before suggesting we go somewhere together. I treat him as coldly as possible and give him a very definite decline. He seemed to have finally given up as he stopped coming by, much to my relief, but that wasn't quite the end. A few weeks went by when I received a furious text from Glenn. Oh, so what, you're not even talking to me anymore? I couldn't believe it after everything he'd done, and said he thinks I'm a horrible person for doing all of this. How could someone be so self-centered and deluded? I told him of course I'm not talking to him anymore, and that he's beyond abusive, unhinged, and thinks he can have whatever he wants, and I made it very clear I never wanted to see him again, and just leave me alone. He never replied, but rather than make me feel better, I was growing increasingly paranoid if it meant he had truly given up, or because he was planning an attack. Luckily, my roommate and our best friend were big burly guys and made sure to escort me around because he knew where I lived and where I worked, and I'm happy to say that text message really was the last I ever heard from him. I don't wish him ill. I hope he gets the help he needs, but in any case, I'd rather never meet again. This happened in 2008 when I was 9 years old. I lived in a townhome community where each road had two sides of homes in between the backs of houses. There was a back road with alleyways that went in between each building section. I lived on the edge of one of these, and my townhome was on one of the alleyways. I lived on one street, and across the back road on the opposite side lived an elderly woman whose name I can't even remember. I'm not sure what her situation was, but for whatever reason she never liked me specifically. She was creepy and spray painted all of her windows so that no one could see in her house. However, that never stopped her from sometimes staring out of her bedroom window directly at mine and keeping it open at night to shine a red strobe light into my room across the way. She used to yell how she hated us. I was in the 4th grade, and on a particular January morning I had unfortunately missed the bus. My dad sent me outside to get in the car so that he could drive me, and he said he'd follow me out soon after. As I was walking to my dad's car, she came out of the alleyway next to my house slowly with a gigantic kitchen knife behind her back. She raised it and began running after me. I was faster than her, so I was able to avoid her and was able to get into the house. She walked and stood on the neighbor's porch across the way and stared at my house. I was terrified. My dad ran and yelled at her, and she said she wanted to get rid of us stupid kids. My parents called the police, but the police sent her home and had an ambulance pick her up. Later, my parents went to some kind of court meeting about it, but I never really found out the details. But I didn't see her again after that until 1 year later. It had snowed that morning, and I was going to run out to the front door and play in the snow. That's when I opened the door and see her standing on the porch, but looking out towards the road. I panicked, closed and locked the door. I ran up to my parents' room and told them what happened, and we saw her walk off the porch up the street, and I never saw her again after that. My family has since Moved far away from there, but people I know still say she lives there, and her windows are still the same spray painted ones, though it doesn't affect me as much as it used to. I still don't like being around knives. I was the day driver at a pizza place I was working at. On my usual grind, I hit the second house of my double and knock on the door. Oh, and it was an online order, so I get to the door, really crappy house in a nice neighborhood, but they had some really good cars. I knock and wait about a minute, and then someone just starts yelling who the hell ordered pizza, so I get a little nervous thinking that I went to the wrong house. I hear in the background a really subtle voice say I did, and I'm invited inside, which I don't want to do seeing as I had about $350 in cash on me. The dude's persistent, so I walk in and he leads me into the kitchen. As I turn into the living room / kitchen area, I see a girl who appeared to be roughly 21 in age, but had the appearance of being hit by a truck while lumping on the couch with a needle in her arm. Instantly I wanted to run. I'd never seen anyone do heroin before, and I really didn't want to stay to see what happens. The guy tells me to put the pizzas on the counter and then begins yelling, "How are we going to pay for these?" Me crapping myself, I wanted to say that they were free, but then he pulls out a W of cash. There was probably thousands of dollars there. I'm sweating. He pulls out guns as well and leaves them on the counter and gives me $50 on a $19 order and says to keep the change. As I turn and run the hell out of there, his buddies then come in through the back door, say they got the hookup on something, and start smoking it right there. And then me, innocent 18-year-old from the nicest part in Texas, was so scared they were just going to shoot me on the spot. I get back to my car and do about a 100 back to the store and block them from ever ordering from us again. I'm about a 25-minute drive from Anderson, and I have a few experiences to share from when I first moved to Indiana. My mother was on her way home from a concert when her GPS led her down a small dirt road between two cornfields. She ended up in front of a large tree in front of a hidden cemetery, and she told me about it after she turned around and tried her GPS again, this time successfully making it home. I begged her to take me, and she, my older cousin, and I decided to check it out. She asked some coworkers about it, and apparently a farmer had hung his wife in that tree, and her GPS led her to it. We were a little freaked out, but we took several photos on our old digital camera. My cousin informed us that we were a few minutes away from Crybaby Bridge. We had heard stories and decided to go check it out as well, but didn't experience much at the bridge aside from an uncomfortable feeling, and were a little bit disappointed. And on our way home we passed an abandoned barn diagonal from an old church, so we pulled over and took some pictures. When we finally got home, we uploaded the pictures to our laptop and adjusted the brightness and contrast, and discovered the face of a little girl peeking from behind one of the headstones in the cemetery. We discovered an abundance of orbs surrounding the barn, and upon doing research learned that it was actually a common ritual site for Satanists and pagans and other spiritual groups, and that the cemetery didn't show off on maps. There was simply no known coordinates for it. It's been 11 years since I've been to those places, and I really want to go back and see if anything has changed. One thing's for sure though, Anderson is creepy as hell and crawling with negative energy.